So thank you so much for joining me, Eric. I first kind of came onto you from Robin when I was working with Robin. He helped me for North Americans, and
Nice.
one of the things I really liked about him was I didn't realize like how similar our training style was. When I asked him, where he got that from, he gave all the credit in the world to you. So I was really looking forward to talk to you. So thank you so much for joining me. I have Mr. Eric Seifert on. Did I say that right? I'm sorry.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
At
Yep.
Core Muscle Activation on IG. You are one of the top trainers over there at Pure Muscle, right?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. Yeah. Big North Mecca.
I was just there for the first time after the North Americans, and it was cool, man. It's a really cool gym to be able to go and work at every single day and work with some of the guys you work with.
Yeah.
So let me get a little bit about your background, Eric. I know you're big into MAT. Is that kind of what you say the groundwork for most everything that you do?
So my journey kind of started in the strength coach world, and I'm probably a lot older than you, so kind of personal training was just sort of a thing. Like you just sort of started, helping people, and then it was like, oh, people pay you for this, and so um, I started personal training many years ago, and then it was kind of like, oh, this is kind of like tutoring. I wanted to be a teacher, so it was kind of like this is kind of like tutoring people. People are actually paying you for individual attention, program design. I worked in a Nautilus club, and funny enough, weirdly, a bunch of people sent people to a Nautilus club because Dr. Jones developed it. So if you had problems, you should, go with the doctor. I'm like, not that kind of doctor, but so somehow going to machines and Nautilus Club was going to give you, I don't know, be safer for some ridiculous thing. And so I just got used to kind of doing programs for people and helping a lot more kind of general population and some kind of injured people, and
Is that
then
who the population was early on? It was more just
yeah,
GP
yeah. It
injuries.
was general population for sure. There was for sure always, most gyms have some bodybuilders in them, but it was generally more people, and then some injured people would come in, and my boss didn't want to work with them, so it was like, you work with Eric, and so then generally I kind of thought, oh, this is kind of a gong show, just working with these injured people. And then I got into strength coaching relative to hockey because we're in Canada, so everything's hockey. And then I realized that was kind of more like babysitting than I realized. And I kind of looked at the career arc of like, man, if I do this for X amount, then you become an NHL strength coach, what do you make? And I was like, oh man, this is not a career arc that seems like an upward trending thing. So, I stayed back in sort of general population, and then luckily
And
I was kind of
I'm sorry, where are you located at this time? Is this still
I'm
in the
up in
area you're in
I'm
now?
up all in
Okay.
Toronto,
In
yeah, Greater
Toronto?
Toronto area, um and so then I went back in general population into some kind of big kind of little hole in the wall type gyms, but with like competitive, tons of people trying to apply in there, and kind of working with tons of trainers in a small space. And then it kind of became like I got exposed to MAT really early when the developer had sort of decided to teach it. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the RTS program, Resistance Training Specialist out of Oklahoma with
Um,
Tom
you know,
Purvis.
I never did MAT specifically myself. I was mentored by somebody who was really big into it, so we went through a lot of it, but I've never formally gone through it.
No, yeah. So the RTS program, Resistance Training Specialist, is like a science-based, learn how to take apart equipment, understand mechanics, moment arms, how to fit people on equipment. But it doesn't teach, it's sort of like how do you take apart equipment and exercise, but it doesn't teach you how to take apart bodies. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, well, wait a minute, here's everything I need to know about this exercise and how to fit somebody and how to adapt to, how to break the code on this equipment. But wait a minute, I don't know why they can't follow my instructions, and why they're squeezing one butt cheek, or why are they doing all these things that I'm telling them not to do, kind of thing. And so that's when MAT falls in that category of, wait a minute, I have to get better at assessing people and their abilities and their skills, what they can and cannot do, before I start applying, hey, I'll just fix it all with exercise, right? And so that's where my background kind of allow me to kind of merge those two things, right? Like, how do I assess and treat, function and dysfunction, all the way from most dysfunction all the way up to performance, right? A bodybuilder would come see me typically nowadays for, hey, I can't develop an area, or, I was kind of listening to some of your podcast stuff, some of your YouTube stuff, and it sounds like I'm kind of brother of another mother. I'm like, oh yeah, there's lots of stuff you're saying where I'm like, yeah, your shitty development potentially is just more really indicative of the style of training or the things that you don't do or don't understand in training. And but the other half is they could understand it, they just can't make it happen, and
Exactly.
so how do I break them down, and how do I pick things apart to actually try and turn some stuff back on or make that more muscle available before then they can listen to me and go, oh, now I understand what you mean. Now I can create internal rotation, or now I can protract. I couldn't, my body's stuck in upward rotation, and you're like, you should downwardly rotate. And they're like, I don't know, am I doing it? And you're kind of like, okay, no, no, no. So if you can use MET as almost this adjunct between the strength coach side and the therapy side. They're not injured, but how do you help them sort of become more mobile and in a strong way? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I was really, because it's the first time you're exposed to anything like that. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is a missing piece, and you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
really
yeah.
see how. Like I remember being a trainer, like you said, when I first started. So I've been training for almost 20 years too. So it's interesting to see how it's changed over the years. But yeah, I remember exactly like, okay, well, why can't you do this when you do it the other side? Like what's going on? Like just do
Hmm.
it better, bro. And now
Yeah.
like I'm like, oh
Pay
man, I'm
pay
sorry.
attention. Yeah.
Just try a little harder. So before we
Yeah,
get
that's
into
it.
kind
Yeah,
of
the try a little harder. I like that one. That was
just
just like,
focus.
did you get an F in gym class? Like, were you smoking outside? What
Right.
happened?
Or then for a trainer who doesn't have any limitations, and they don't understand, like, why is this difficult for you? But
Yeah, that's the whole, when the trainer goes, look what I'm doing, just do what I do. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah. How do
and
they
and you always have the option to regress as a trainer, and that there's a time and a place for that, but there's so much more value to be built if you can address the underlying issue, and then you don't have to regress. You can actually do what you were trying to do, which is also
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
there's a mental thing to that as well, not having to take a step back.
Yeah, I would be like working, like in some of those populations. Sometimes it's funny though, because here I am working with, broken population and general population, like post this or need a knee replacement or hip replacement. And you're kind of like, well, they're older and they're broken. And, my expectation kind of goes, Shh. But then I'm working with this person is property of some team and they're 18 years old. And I'm like, okay, how do you move as bad as that lady? Like how are you effectively an elite athlete teenager, and yet you still move poorly? Or that guy with the open heart surgery moves better than you do, and you're like, how does that pop? Like I thought I was going to jump into an easy population, and then you've got
Mm.
performance athletes that move poorly, and you're
They're
like,
the most fucked up there are.
yeah, I was like, what is happening? They're younger, they should be better. They're elite athlete, they should be easier. And I was like, no, this is like totally different.
Well, they're producing
So
so
where
much
do you
force.
yeah, where do you see the congruency between, this older injured population moving in any way, shape, or form better than this young population that is obviously exhibiting elite athlete stuff? And so sometimes you see it all more like a continuum, because we see a professional athlete and say, oh, they got to be amazing. And you're like, oh, some of them still just, can perform at a high level despite the dysfunction, until finally there's sort of some level of dysfunction that finally kind of pulls them back down to earth, and now nobody wants to pay them for that kind of performance, right? you
Yeah,
know
see it all the time. So it's interesting that you. So how long have you been a trainer? Would you say if you don't want to put a year on it, that's okay. But how long have you been in the
yeah,
training
I'm
industry?
super old now. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've been a trainer. Gosh, I'm 56, and I've been a trainer since I was 22. So, let's not do the
Okay.
math, right? But I've certainly seen. Now, I've been in a gym all my life, right? It's kind of like the most easy thing. You play, football, and it's like you live in a gym, and eventually somebody says, they'll pay you to go to the gym. It's like, oh, okay. I was
Yeah.
always in the gym anyway, so who cares, right? But yeah, seeing the industry shift. It's funny though. There's so many things that when I've been an MAT practitioner for over 20 years, and when I'm in my own office by myself in my own facility, I'm not exposed, especially let's say to bodybuilding. I'm not exposed to sort of the crazy out there, and so I'd need an athlete to come in, and they would show up, and I'm helping them, if I use the word fix, I say that appropriately, but help them fix the shoulder motion. They don't have any upward rotation of their scapula. Now they're like, wow, that's great. Next time I see them, they've lost that again. And I was like, well, what happened between now and when I saw you? And sometimes I'd have to haul them into the gym, because I have a whole gym in my facility, and I would say, show me how to do XYZ. And they were like, oh, that's how you're hurting yourself, And I would see like the typical rib flare, scapular depression, something, and I'm like, but you're trying to do a pull up. Like, what are you doing? And they're watching, they're tearing their shoulder shreds, and I would say, oh, I have to kind of fix your mechanics, right? I make something available, but then you go right back to really poor execution,
Yeah, the
thinking
brain
that there
pattern.
was this. Yeah, but it would be like saying the myths that I was never exposed to, because I'm not
Yeah.
walking into a bodybuilding gym like Pure, where I'm like now surrounded going, oh, wait a minute, this is where all this comes from. Like, it's deaf leading the blind, right? Like the monkeys say the gorillas do it, and then the monkey goes, I want to be a gorilla, I better do what he does, and so on and so on. Or I saw it on YouTube, or I saw it on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And usually what you're seeing is gratuitous, crazy stuff. And so then they're like, oh, I should try and do that. That guy's bigger than me, or she's, got a better butt than me. I'll do what she does. And you're kind of like, oh, wow, no wonder this is where this misinformation comes from. This is where this sort of monkey see, monkey do keeps kind of propagating itself, right? And so now I kind of get to, I'm going to say I'm in the trench more often now instead of my you know, little white castle island where I don't get exposed to it. Now I see it all the time, right?
Which makes you a much better practitioner, to actually,
Yeah,
have the real world and like heavy force production, because it's very different. Because I've been in pretty clinical environments, and things that work for somebody who's not producing a ton of force, like they don't necessarily work the same way for somebody else. And it's always best to keep things by doing it right in the gym. I assume that
yeah.
if someone's able to load the tissues right the way you've kind of got them, you don't have to do as much manual work. You don't have to do as much resetting because
No,
they're,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Once you sort of correct I mean, let's say they have an opportunity, like they cannot horizontally adduct or something. They can't squeeze their pec because their shoulder doesn't protract, or they've lost internal rotation or something, GH internal rotation. And so you facilitate that, and now they go right back to externally rotate. They go right back to this shitty form. You say, wait a minute, I need to review that. Or, I wonder if they do that. Let's go on the floor and explore that a little bit, or I have a gold standard, which I don't get access to all the time, but somebody says, hey, I'm going to take you in the room, and we're going to do some therapy space, but I'm just going to explore what you can and cannot do based on your pain, based on your symptom, based on your lack of development, those type of things. And then we're going to go out on the floor after I've seen, because pretty much you say, like, they can't do this. Wow, I bet a push-up sucks. Oh, I hate that
yeah,
exercise. Or, I bet decline press is really terrible for you. Oh yeah, no, it really jacks up my shoulder. So that's like, okay, let's go visit decline press. Let's go visit those
exactly.
positions. And
What's
now
causing the issues?
I can turn it back on, restore motion possibility, but now I have to kind of work with, now let's explore how you're breaking this, right? And if you can all of a sudden create an experience where they go, wow, I never felt my pec, like candy for me is somebody saying to me, wow, I really feel my bicep or that head of my bicep, and I don't have elbow pain.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, bingo, yes, there you go. You've not been, either your body doesn't have the ability to create this, or you have a weird understanding what you think you're trying to do, or you don't know how to fit yourself to equipment. And so the bolt moves on an axis, and you're not lining up that bolt. You're kind of setting up some problems, right? And so I see an awful lot of that where people just don't, they think it's almost self-explanatory, like a piece of
Yeah.
equipment. If you don't know, kind of like, I'll say, like an exercise is like a recipe, right? If you kind of go, oh, I want big arms. What should I, what do I bake? I want a cake. I want a chocolate cake. Okay, what goes in that? And so if you walk over to a piece of equipment and you're like, I don't know what this does, but there's a little nameplate and there's a little red guy, guy with it filled in red, and you kind of go, oh, okay, my arm goes here, and I grab the thing, and there's a start and a finish kind of look, and you kind of think, or a magazine, you're like, oh, start this exercise looks like this at the start and this at the end. Now, if I just do that, I should get the recipe should go where it's supposed to go. And then on one level, yeah, sure, you're not necessarily wrong. But if somebody say, I feel that in my arms, and I'm like, you don't feel your biceps are in your arms, but you don't feel your biceps. No, I feel my arms working. I'm like, okay, then chances are it's not fit to you, or it's not specific enough for you to understand, like, what are you really trying to contract,
Yeah.
right? And so I find a lot of that where people that are athletes, that go to the gym, sometimes decide to fall into bodybuilding. And I'm like, well, athletics, not to say bodybuilders are not athletes, but athletics and bodybuilding are not the same thing.
Yeah, not at all.
Powerlifting and athletics
Yeah.
kind of slides in
Yeah.
similar
A
directions,
lot of
right?
orientation
Can you
strategies.
can you move stuff? I
Exactly.
don't care how you tackle him. I don't care how you
Use
score the
everything.
goal.
Yeah.
Whatever you had to do. Nobody's going to say, well, no, the touchdown doesn't count because you didn't do it right. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Right. So if it says get that thing off your chest, get that bar off the ground, it's like those are all just strategies that an athlete will employ to like find anything. Right. I mean, I worked in the NFL directly for 3 years before COVID, and you look at some guys that have some insane bodies, but you look at some guys that don't relative to the bodybuilding world, and you watch them just flip a car over, and you're like, oh, okay. They don't look like a classic. Wow, that guy's a bodybuilder. Look at him. But sure enough, they have turtle guys left, right, and center, and you
Yeah.
think, whoa, that guy's ridiculously strong, but he doesn't look the part. Aside from being a huge human, he doesn't look like a classic, Tom Haviland or, a bodybuilder guy, right? And then you sort of say, well, okay, athletes are different, right? Like athletes that just want to move stuff, they don't really care how, right? And ultimately the goal for those sports is like, I don't really care how you do it. Just, score the goal or stop the guy or whatever. When you get to bodybuilding, it's like, how do you want to move that? What is trying to move that? That's a completely different question, right? And to me, it seems like the most obvious, kind of orientation of
You would
like,
think, but
I
it's
mean,
not.
you're standing up there posing. There's no weights being lifted, so how are you contracting anything? Or that doesn't spend any energy at all because you didn't lift any weights, right? So you can do that for hours. And it's like, nope,
No.
no, pretty sure you can't. So
Yeah,
this is when
definitely
I'm
not.
like, bodybuilding is literally flexing. And if you thought of it as, my whole goal is to flex more in one area and not let my body out of it. Right. So to me, it always seems like, wait a minute, your whole point of bodybuilding is to try and find disadvantage,
Yes.
right? How do I
Yeah.
disadvantage my pecs? Not
Hmm.
how do I advantage my pecs so I can move more weight, but then all of a sudden I don't get the development that I was really expecting, right? Like, but I'm bench pressing 500 pounds, but it doesn't look like I bench pressed 500
Yeah,
pounds.
exactly.
I don't seem to have that beautiful, amazing chest, and I'm like, well, you found a strategy to move more weight, thinking that more weight equals more stress, but you found somehow a way to lift more weight and do less work, right?
Would you
And
say
and
chest is people train it kind of with not exactly the right way more than most other
yeah,
body
yeah,
parts?
oh
Definitely the
yeah,
most.
yeah. I what are the top requested areas that I get these really big, huge dudes that be like, hey, I'm doing something wrong with my chest workout because I'm either injuring something or something's getting really sore in the wrong way. Um, I
What are the
get
most common issues you see with chest
Yeah,
training?
I see underdeveloped upper chest. That's got to be the number one, kind of thing because everything is all sort of scoop, right? Everything's trying to scoop up. Like if I fill up from bottom here, I'll get to my upper pec somehow. If I just sort of if I blow it up, it'll slowly start to get to my. And I'm like, you're not even angling and controlling ribs and breathing, and you're lifting your chest up for everything, and that's kind of the one poison I see throughout is like somehow powerlifting, bench pressing a bar
Right.
has infected every single
It's
movement. So it's
wild.
like, so here I am going to do a row. I have a chest pad, and you told me to chest up or posture up, chest up. And I'm like, what are we doing now? So sure enough, I don't see any development in sort of middle trap. Everybody comes to me for the same thing. Can you help me develop? The middle of my back has no density. I don't have thoracic lat. I was like, well, you don't move your shoulder blades. So kind of like, guess what? And oh, my rhomboid stuff doesn't develop very well. And oh, I don't need to develop traps. And I'm like, oh, you're talking about one part of your trap that you don't think you need to develop. But like all of your trap does upward rotation and you never rotate anything. So
Yeah. So your lat's missing out,
kind of surprising that your lats, everything becomes teres major and,
Yeah.
maybe some divisions of lat, but generally you use so many strategies of chest up that you end up sort of almost like, how can I move the bar the least amount of space? Right.
Exactly.
And
And people
so
feel the difference too when they do it right. So it's like people are almost taking discounting their own mind muscle sensation because they can
yeah,
push more weight in it is how they were told. But it's like literally you feel so much better if you do it right.
yeah. I mean, look, I mean, half the time, I mean, it's funny. I remember talking to, first time I worked with Ben Pekulski, right? World class bodybuilder way back in the day. And I remember saying to him, I said, okay, so if you could look theoretically, hypothetically, if you could look how you look, and he's at like an Olympia level bodybuilder at this point, you could look like you look right now and lift 5 pounds. Would you be interested in that? Versus, hey man, I want to move a lot of weight, right? And I said, I don't think it's possible, but if it was, would you be interested in exploring that? And he looked at me, he's like, yeah, I'd really be interested in exploring that. Now, my bias is that how can I make, how can you get more out of less? But most people's strategies are how can I get less out of more? And so I'm like, if it's powerlifting or if you can Olympic lift more weight than everybody else, there's lots of people going to copy you with whatever you're doing. But there's a reason why eventually, as it gets heavier and heavier, your strategies have to start looking the same, right? And so we started saying, some guys do stuff so easily, and they don't even know what they're doing, and some guys can do stuff wrong and seemingly still tolerate and still see development. But as you get farther and farther and farther up the tree of superstar bodybuilders, there's less and less room for just I'm a big dude and I outsize somebody. You know what I mean? It turns into like, well, he doesn't move very well and he doesn't pose very well and he looks like he's huffing and puffing up there and it looks like his gut is falling out and he doesn't look like he's got endurance to hold a pose, or like eventually the scorecard is like, yeah, you got to get perfect. You're not standing up there against me. You're standing up there against other pretty people that are obviously all one shows and have all, dieted properly and suffered and can tolerate drugs and all the other stuff. So it's like you're looking at perfect bodies. Now, how do you take an A plus and say that's not good enough, right? And most of them just go out and they'll do more like what they've already done. They'll just do more of that.
Yep.
Somebody says, "Oh, just your back needs to be bigger," so they'll go do more back. But it's like, but it should be thicker. It's like, okay, I'll just keep doing more stuff. It's like, okay, it didn't seem to work. Like
doing more of the wrong stuff isn't going to.
I'm doing more
make
of
it
the
better.
wrong stuff. I'm still not, but I'm somehow. It's like a balloon animal. You're thinking it's going to eventually fill in or something. If I just keep puffing, eventually it'll fill out, right? And you see kind of some of the people where it's like, yeah, doing more of the same thing but expecting a different result.
Exactly.
Right. So I sort of go, yeah, people don't understand. Funny if it sounds, there's some guys with some big arms, but sometimes it's like you're not really understanding. Like some of those orientation strategies turn into like, how can I pivot? How can I bend sideways to do these rows? And I'm not a fan of any of that stuff, to be honest. I think that's garbage for most people. I think that's asking for risk they don't even understand. It's just more like, oh, how can I move something in a straight line? And, it's sort of one of my pet peeves, and usually lunges, it's another kind of area where I'm like, man, people just like don't know what they're doing relative to that. I sound super critical, but those are things
I get it. If anyone's going to get it, I'm the right.
This is where people are asking me to, fix that stuff. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So like,
what is it
I'm
about
doing
lunges?
all the exercises where I'm doing all the recipes and the cake doesn't come out. And I'm like, well, you either don't have available stuff or you don't understand, internal rotation of your hip, or you don't understand weight shift, or, even funny enough from the sports movement side, it's like, oh, you could help people with understanding sports movement to reintroduce like that explosive position that you'd have to do from sports movement. You can just break it down to smaller segments. Now we're back to lunges and lateral hops and control of internal rotation of a tibia, that kind of stuff, right? And all of a sudden, whoa, I feel hamstring tie-in. I feel my glutes all of a sudden explode. All of a sudden, my lateralis is
quad actually
like
that's
growing
exactly.
again.
Sweet.
Wow, I've
So
got
what do you see with lunges in leg training in general that are the main issues?
So typically, I teach a more hip. I very much teach a more hip-driven angle, just as a natural. I think too many people are trying to be like if too many people have the style of a bar on their back lunge, right? So if you have a bar on your back and you go to lunge, you better be upright.
Yeah.
Why? Because it wants to pancake you, right? So someone says, yeah, you got to stay upright to help, to not hurt your back. I'm like, oh, okay, but you don't have a bar on your back. So why are you so upright? And why are you measuring your back leg hitting the ground? When in reality, it's a front leg exercise, right? It's a front leg loaded stack position. So most people, they lose their hip to shoulder. That's when you see that sort of hitchy forward and backward and a lot of the balance problems that you see. Most people don't investigate any internal rotation. So when they land wide because for some ridiculous reason they think, oh, I want to develop my sweep, so I got to go wider. And I'm like, it's the opposite of what you're trying to do,
Right.
right? It's like you're investigating zero sweep because your lateralis is like, well, we're abducted, and then we don't have any real great handoff to the next leg because you've interrupted. Now you've got this sort of zigzag pattern where you see guys sort of stop and start, and because they're so worried about being vertical as opposed to being angled and stacked over, they don't get a lot of hip drive, and it just turns into this sort of up down position. And I was like, look, man, that's like a shitty Bulgarian to me, like where you're leaning on your back leg and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
this really hurts my hip. I'm like, which one? The back one. I'm like, yeah, because you got all your weight on the back leg. So, that's where you start seeing like a hip capsule issue or,
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff that they don't even, I mean, they don't even know the risk they're taking when they're doing it. Right.
Yeah, and you said something
So,
really interesting about how they deviate the vastus lateralis, laterally, and a lot of times that's just the resting position too, right? And so they can't
yeah.
develop that outer
Yep.
sweep no matter what they do.
Yeah, they're just finding a way to sort of just catch it and not do any work. You know what I mean? So,
What do you do with
or
foot contacts? I see you coaching foot contacts pretty good with some of the leg work you do. So what do you cue people for that?
yeah, so a lot of things that I see, even from leg presses or lunges or whatever, is really just this loss that they think like an ankle dorsiflexion is in one plane only, right? They think ankle dorsiflexion is just a simple flat hinge, but they don't see it as like rotation. And
Patient.
you know, I mean, most of us are not going to be like windlass effect. Most people are like, what's that mean? But when they teach it in school, sometimes they show you a flat picture, right? They show you a
Yeah,
triangle with it
yeah, exactly what
folding,
I'm
but they
envisioning.
don't show you this way.
Yeah,
They don't show
exactly.
it front to back, right? And so it's actually like loading down and in and coiling back up and out. So if, again, back to hockey up here, it's like, look, man, I need you on the inside edge of your skates. I need you on the inside edge of your skis. I need you to like embrace the fact that the foot falls down and in for a reason, and that full dorsiflexion flat foot. And I don't know if like, certainly in the squat world, CrossFit has kind of weirdly affected a bunch of things where people like stack up their ankles, right?
You mean
They'll
like
say,
with
oh,
wedges, or what do you mean?
no, no, I don't mean with wedges. I mean, they literally try and like supinate their foot up as high as possible,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
right? And so what happens when you do that is you lock the midfoot, right?
Yeah, you don't have
The
any
problem,
IR.
yeah, but the problem is, yeah, you have no IR because it's externally rotated, but
Yeah,
now they can move more weight
yeah,
because they've stacked and now it's just pterocrural motion. So now it's not total foot anymore because they're so desperately worried about the knees diving in. But but I'm like, wait a minute, that's a full pronation position. Like I dare
exactly.
you to jump off a box and land
Exactly.
like that with hundreds of pounds on your back and wonder why that feels like crap, right? And so I'm saying, like, wait a minute, that's a whole pronation mechanism that most people like have kind of trained themselves out of, like a trained dysfunction. Because I can put more weight on my back, I should keep stacking that up. And I'm like, wait, but they ask you for more intra-rotation at the hip, but now you're asking for extra rotation at the foot.
Yeah,
So what's the magic thing that's getting stuck between those? Oh, your ACL.
yeah.
That's cool. My lower
Well, your
leg
tibia is going to
goes out
ER. Yeah.
and my hip goes in. It's like, oh, it's
Yep.
fine. Just coil your ACL. It's great.
Yeah.
And then we start wondering why we have patellar issues and they need knee straps. And I'm like, you're doing two completely different things at the knee
Yeah.
and wondering why your knee doesn't love that, right? Like the patella is going outside on the bottom and inside on the top, and then wondering why we feel like we're grinding on our patella. So it's like, yeah,
And
that's a mistake.
you could literally check it yourself too. You could look at your dorsiflexion, your tibial internal rotation, your hip IR, and like do it the right way, they're all better. You do it the wrong way, they're all shittier. You're just reinforcing
Yeah,
that with
like wow,
poundages.
that squat, I paid a heavy price for that squat,
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
right? But meanwhile, you're squatting, so maybe well, everybody's suffering, it's fine. I'm like, no, no, you're suffering different, you
Yeah.
know.
So maybe for people who aren't aware, can you do a quick explanation of MAT and some of the basic principles?
Yeah, so muscle activation techniques, plural, um, is a series of I'll call it systems, all like being a little more complex as you sort of go up in education. It's a manual therapy. We would do a global range of motion um, to more specific range of motion exam, meaning not like in the physical therapy world where they're doing like joint by joint. We'd be looking at sort of a comparative assessment of mobility, right? So range of motion, but we'd still be looking at more muscular influence. I still have to know how joints are built and how they're supposed to move, but I'm looking at that joint versus that joint as a comparison to say which one seems to have lost, to have comparatively similar motion. If I've lost 50% of the motion of that joint, I have suspicion that you have a bunch of muscles that saying like I can't participate, and so the joint with inhibited tissue will start to exhibit less and less motion and get stiffer and get irritated, that kind of stuff. But more importantly, you'll start to ask other joints to start working harder. And so generally our kind of goal is to look for where are you moving the poorest and try and look at muscle testing around that area. So we have specific muscle tests for, let's say your navicular cannot invert, right, which is a pronation mechanism, which is way down the middle of your midfoot. So the inside of your midfoot cannot drop down, and you have maybe 7 muscles I might look at that can cross that axis. And if you have 7 of them not working, there's a reason your joint will not drop, right? And so if I could test those, I can treat those. We'll do a cross-friction palpation if we find something not working, turn it back on. I will go muscle by muscle by muscle through your body to facilitate all that. And if I can restore that muscle, it's kind of funny if you think of like every medical model has the same 4 steps. The first step of physio or physical therapy when you go in is what? Pain, right? Pain tells you there's something wrong, but typically it tells them where to go. So if you have pain in an elbow, they're looking at your elbow, right? And so there's nothing necessarily wrong with that until you get into sort of chronic dysfunction things where all of a sudden now you might have expression of pain, but it's coming from a shoulder. But my elbow really hurts, but my shoulder is the actual dysfunction. And so they're treating an elbow and it does or doesn't get better. You just do that a lot, hoping one day it'll change. Pain is telling you there's a problem, but it's not telling you where to go in that scenario. Second step for every physical therapy is what? Treat inflammation, right? Navigate from pain, treat inflammation. Third step that we must have all done at some point is what? Restore mobility. Hey, Jonathan, that's moving so much better. See, look how that glides now. Here's your exercises. That's the 4th step. Go over to strength. Now, the funny part is from an MET standpoint, I'm starting at strength. I'm starting at strength and saying, hey, do you have the actual muscle capacity, muscle by muscle, to do this? And if I find something weak, can't fire the way it should, I'm going to restore that. And muscle by muscle, as I restore that, one of the byproducts of strength, stability, is increase in range of motion. And if I've increased the range of motion from strength, I don't need inflammation. The body takes that away. If I don't have inflammation, I don't have pain. So I'm working the same steps. I'm just starting at the bottom and working my way up. And so a lot of us would cross over with other practitioners because there's just not as much of us, right? There's so many more practitioners of almost everything than us.
Yeah.
And so we end up in this little weird niche of like, tried this. Sometimes I say to people, I'm in plumbing. It's like going down the drain. Like I'm the guy that you're going to see sort of after you tried everything else. And so once you start facilitating that, the body wants to get better, right? The body doesn't want to stay injured. The body literally, it's like having a workout 7 years ago and you're still sore. We would call somebody, right? You have a bruise and you're like, oh, that has never went away. We would call somebody. The idea that your body, can't recover from trauma is false. But if it's saying, look, there's more things going on here and this protective mechanism hasn't come down because you haven't fixed something, then there's a reason it keeps kind of cycling itself like that. And so if I can intervene in that model and I can introduce, this actual true opportunity for strength, then we can train it, right? Then we can train it. Like when you really, and I'm not as familiar with PRI, is that right? That's the program you work with. I'm not as familiar with how you guys navigate through bodies, but when you have an opportunity to introduce change and then integrate it, it's a super powerful thing, right? Otherwise, you're just kind of plying it in on top, going, well, we'll get it next time, Joe,
Yeah.
rep 2000. Okay. One of these days it's going to be different. And it's kind of like, well, again, we go back to stupid. Like that's insanity, right? Like one of these days it's going to be different. It's not ever going to be different. You haven't changed the actual issue. It's
Exactly.
like looking at a math problem and we say 2 + 2 and we hit 5. equals five. And you're like, I like fives. And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't sort of work that way, Eric. And you're like, okay, well, erase the numbers and we hit clear and we put it in again. Two plus two, five.
Try again.
That doesn't work that way, Eric. I know, but I like fives. I want a five, right? And
I
so
feel
you're
like
like,
it should
okay, well,
work.
and he's like, man, you could keep saying I want a different number after the equal sign, but until you change the numbers on the other side, this is what comes out, right? I don't want a four. I don't like fours. I'm like, well, we're going to need a three somewhere. We're going to need another one somewhere. And if your body's saying, I can't produce that one somewhere else, it's going to say, man, maybe I crank one of those twos up to a three. And now that muscle's working twice as hard, right? 1.5 times, which is okay for a pinch, but now it's doing it for a long time. And eventually that one goes, nah, sorry, I can't produce that much. So now you got a two that needs to somehow become a five. It's like, oh, well, we'll just make that two become a five. Now you have a muscle pushing 2.5 times harder to try and come up with the number you want. And then you go, I don't know how I overtrained. It's like, well, it sounds like overtraining to me, right? But the original problem is you were missing a one. You're missing a one, and the body had to keep finding substitutions, to keep finding some way to come up with their performance. Even if it's activities of daily living, I have to get off the
Yeah.
toilet. I have to get up and down those stairs, right?
Yeah, your
And
body will
that's the
find
part.
options till it runs out.
Yeah, your body's going to keep finding options. I mean, sometimes people come in and they ask me, what am my body doing wrong? I'm like, nothing.
It's amazing. It's doing its job.
Your body's doing everything it can to fight battles you don't even know,
Yeah.
right? It's fighting
Yeah.
forest fires you don't even know
Trying to
exist,
move you
right?
forward in space and get your air in your
Yeah,
lungs.
yeah. When you finally go, oh, body, what the hell, right? Like you just move and something hurts. You're like, where did that come from? The body's like, sorry, man, I dropped something. I just couldn't juggle that much stuff,
Right.
you know?
Now, let me ask you this. If I remember correctly, from when I did do some MAT, I started as a
Sure.
manual therapist before I did anything.
Oh, nice.
And then I got into MAT pretty quick. And I remember doing a lot of kind of positional isometrics in addition to the
Yep.
manual therapy. And I also liked how it had an emphasis on like the shortened range of contraction, where I feel like a lot of emphasis today is length and range, partial length, in which they have their role and they're all good. But I feel like a lot of people overlook the shortened range. Does MAT kind of talk about the importance of the shortened range, and do you incorporate that into your training specifically for mobility benefits or just for like aesthetics and hypertrophy?
For everything. I mean, honestly, like aesthetics is sort of the top of the food chain, but it's like all the other stuff um, is going to get you to aesthetics. Does that make sense? Right? Like if you're not moving well, I mean, well, how can I say this? There's some pretty bodies that don't move well, so I'm like making an edit in my mind, but
In general, and you don't present it well either, usually.
in general, yeah, in general, it's like they're hiding it really well, that kind of stuff. But generally, so if you think of most muscle testing, if anybody's been exposed to muscle testing, it's typically the origin of some of the muscle testing is applied kinesiology or clinical kinesiology, which is very much a sort of a weird cousin within the chiropractic world, right? And so most of their muscle testing is not more specific. They don't have as many tests because they're usually using the muscle testing in relatively lengthened positions to kind of say, oh, your bicep has a nerve plug at C4 to 5, and therefore the brachial plexus comes out of that space. So if I have a weak test in the middle range, it means I need to adjust C4 because somehow there's been a spinal or an organ influence to that muscle. Now they would adjust that, and now muscle test is strong, but they would never bias anything in the shortened position. So that's where if you start looking at Golgi tendon is sort of the for the manual people is like, oh, I'm just going to friction Golgi tendon. And the thing just burp, and you elicit relaxation. You elicit like a reboot. You go to your breaker panel. There, fixed it, mom. Right. And so generally that's a pretty good thing. You stretch, you electrocute, you stick needles in it, irritate something, you massage it, you rub it out, you stretch it, and it's like, oh, there, yeah, reboot it, we're good, right? The body will turn it back on. But if you thought of muscles maybe more like, because they're chemical, electrical in nature, what if you thought of muscles more like fuses, right? And now the capacity of that fuse, if you have a 40 amp fuse, not to confuse anybody with electronic stuff, but if you had a 40 amp fuse, that's an oven, right? That's a pretty big piece of appliance versus a little tiny 5 amp thing that you run your light through, right? But imagine your brain is like, oh, I blew that. Sorry. We're going to have to come up, we go back to numbers. I'm going to have to come up with 40 amps somewhere else, right? How about we wire it through there? Or it comes back on, but it's been damaged, it's been traumatized one way or another. And now it's a 35 amp fuse. Now, every time you load up to that load or that rep range or that fatigue or that stress, it pops again. And now all of a sudden, man, I can't push as much weight before it gets sore. It actually stays sore longer. Like all that sort of degrading sort of, oh, it's seemingly starting to ache earlier. It's starting to bug me. It's starting to become I'm more aware of it. I see weakness. That sense of I can't figure out how I'm doing something wrong because the body's like, I'll give you everything I can, but shut it off again. And so that Golgi tendon just pops and it shuts down, right? And so if you look at in sort of muscle physiology, you look at muscle spindle sensitivity. Well, muscle spindle is kind of very dense at the origins insertions. And if you start looking at muscle when it's very, very short, now you're looking at where all this test becomes specific to muscle function, not nerve plug-in stuff, right? The brain is like, oh no, middle range is nice. Generally you should all be strong there. No argument from me. But when you start seeing shortened bias tests, now you can start picking out, oh, that muscle's in the shortest possible position. If I put force on it now, it better be able to figure out where I am, right? And so the MAT side of things is where you're going to say, man, I'm gonna slide into shortened bias stuff. Now that's when it's really at its disadvantage. So then we start arguing over length and partials and length and range and what's eliciting better hypertrophy. That's got its own science, its own way. But is the muscle healthy? That might be I have to visit. I have to see, can I visit shortened range, right? And so I'm going to challenge it to that most shortened range to see, can it show up? And then, yeah, it should be available to train there too. That makes sense, right? I should see
Yeah.
somebody be able to train to shorten range. And again, full range is kind of one of these weird things that, again, the community, now that I'm exposed to it more, it gets into these crazy spaces of like, what full range of the machine or full range of you or full range of
Yeah.
a quality rep.
Just
Like it
just plane
becomes,
of motion.
yeah, like all of
Yeah.
a
How do you
sudden, like,
define it?
well, yeah, I kind of look and say, well, if you can't, I mean, people say, oh, you love partials. And I'm like, okay, well, if I can move full range, and at some point I can't move full range. But this is now my dedicated. I'm showing you the wrong arm, but I all of a sudden can't move past a certain point, or my rep is going to change its quality. I'm going to change speed. I'm going to do something to change to somehow come up with that range. To me, that's useless. Like that, those strategies of trying making something go from A to B in the bodybuilding world is useless. Like in my mind, I'm not interested in that at all. But if somebody says, wow, I can only move halfway while I keep it the same pace and I keep it under tension, that's a full rep for me. It's just a partial range. Like I can't get any more range out of it. So I would call that still a full rep. If that makes any
Yeah.
sense. And now, of course, the logbook people are like, what do I write down? And I'm like, you're not my friend, man. I'm
Yeah.
not your friend. I'm not the friend of the logbook
I'm not
guy.
a logbook either at
No,
all.
I mean, I can appreciate when I see the guys pulling out their logbooks and writing stuff down, but I'm like, man, there's so many ways to screw with a logbook,
Yeah,
right? Like you
I'm
can
not a
be
big
so
fan.
attached to numbers that don't really mean what do you think? Like you change the
Yeah.
speed on that rep. So how is that the same rep? You changed that to be twice as fast. You held that for 1 second at the bottom. You didn't hold that one for a second at the bottom. Like whatever. Or at the top. I don't care. Whatever. Like there's so many ways to change it that numbers don't really mean anything.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, do you feel it where you're supposed to feel it? Right. People say the mind muscle connection. I'm like, well, okay, it seems a bit of a catch-all phrase now for me, but it's like, do you feel it specifically where you want to put it?
Hmm.
If that you think is mind muscle connection, cool, I'm fine with that. But if you feel it spreading out, then I'm like, then you've changed your rep for the wrong reasons. You've changed how you do it to get more reps, to get more range, to somehow get more numbers, whatever. And I would say, no, just stop. I'm like, I don't care, just stop. Right? You
Yeah,
get more out
exactly.
of rest and do it again. And they're like, oh man, rest longer. Well, it didn't leave my spot, but I can't do as many reps. I can't do. It's like great. That degrading is meaning you're getting fucking tired exactly where you want to put it. versus I built a strategy that somehow I got 10 extra reps,
Right.
you know, and I magically got stronger, you know, like that means you weren't really making yourself work hard at all.
So are you like pretty similar to me in the sense that you'll do a set to, I mean, I'm not big on like RPEs and RIRs. I'm pretty much going until I kind of lose the full range of motion, and then I'll decide like you kind of doing, do I want to go through partials, which are now the full range of motion? So I would say I'm always
Yeah.
at failure, but obviously our failure looks a lot different than someone else's failure.
Yeah, like we're looking at this, like I'm still fighting it out. And, I mean, I think I've seen Robin puts a lot of stuff out that we do, and sometimes you'll see him really struggle with a half, a quarter rep
Yeah.
or something. And
It
to
fucking
his credit,
hurts.
yeah, to his credit, I'm like, yeah, or I'll hold them, I'll put restrictions on stuff and say, I'm going to stop you in the middle of a rep, or I'm going to get ready for me to stop you in the
Yeah, I
middle of
think
a
I was
rep.
doing some of your shit too. I think you had me doing
Yeah.
some stuff for sure.
And I'll say, like, I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to stop, but you don't know
Like on
when
a
I'm going to
hack?
say
You're doing
it.
that on a fucking hack? That's what he
Yeah,
made
I
me
do that
do.
on a hack. Yeah, I've done it on a hack, or I've done it where it's like, you have to go to the bottom of this rep and you have to show me 1 inch and completely stop, and then hold that for a second. Now go again. And I don't mean bounce, right? So they have to decelerate, right? Like, I mean, there's so many ways to make it harder, and take away skill, like become a different skill just by
Yeah.
changing that. There's like, how do you mark all that down in a logbook and say, well, he made it harder this way, he made it harder that way, he made it harder this way. All I know is it was fucking hard. That's it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I'm
The
the same
goal of
exact
our
way.
workout is finding ways to make it hard. The easiest part of our whole workout as a coach is like, well, put that pin a little lower, right?
Yeah,
Like
because
that's got to be the easiest part of anybody's job, is just pick up a big old cookie and put it on the
right.
side, and say, great, 5 plates it is, right? It's like, by the time I get to that, I've exhausted all these other things where they're
Yeah,
just like,
exactly. There's no
man,
other option. Yeah.
there's no other
So
option than, man, you've earned it. You've earned it.
yeah,
Here you go. Here's your cookie.
exactly.
Boom. You know,
And then it's just gonna suck even worse again. So it's not like you're looking
yeah.
forward to it. Every
And all
time
of
I
a
go
sudden they're
up, I'm
like,
like, oh shit.
man, oh yeah, I get to start this tree all over again,
Yeah,
right? This
right.
mountain I got to climb again, right? But ultimately, once you start establishing that level of, and Robin's a great client. Robin's a great athlete, because generally, I mean, I could tell him to eat a chair and he would be
Yeah.
like, okay, with the bolts,
Yep.
and generally that to me is a professional, right? Somebody that just wants to get better. And I will say that about Pure is there's a huge bunch of athletes there that, there's not a lot of ego, at least from my perspective. There's not a lot of ego. Everybody just wants to get better,
Yeah.
and so,
It was a cool
um,
culture. Just the
yeah,
general
it's
members, not even just the superstars, just everyone there is like,
yeah,
yeah,
everybody
it
just wants
was,
to work hard, and everybody's
yeah,
happy to just, be getting after it, kind of thing. And,
yeah,
generally it's a group of people that just want to work harder. It's like, oh, so that's for a coach. That's just like, oh, playground, like
right.
all the equipment and all the people that want to get on it and don't know how to make it harder. It's like, oh yeah, you want to make this harder? No problem. Right. And so that's all you can ask is, do you want this workout to be harder? Or are you trying to, there's so many other ways to make it harder than just heavier,
Yeah.
right? And so, when you start to teach them how to play with those toys, it's like, okay, here's another way. This is a punishing aspect. Let's do partial range here on purpose, or now make you hold and push through a partial. Or, we had a leg curl that I hadn't used. There's so many different pieces of equipment in there. There's
Yeah.
one that is an old Body Masters I'd never used before, and I was working out with Dorian, who's the owner there, and he goes, "What's that? What's that little bar for?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a block pin. So you have a
Oh,
spongy block pin, not a solid. So you end up pushing into a blocker that has a spring on it. So you don't push into a solid, like you don't hit a wall.
yeah,
You hit a
yeah.
soft, and it's like you have to push into that wall." And he was like, oh my God, that was the worst,
Oh,
because I
that's
kept
cool. Yeah.
moving. I kept moving the block pin.
Yeah.
He had to, like, go find it now, go find it now, go find it now. Not
So like an
a random,
overcoming isometric kind of thing.
yeah, like
Yeah,
all of a
yeah,
sudden you have to push into this sort of
yeah,
soft isometric edge at a different spot. And all
yeah.
of a sudden it's like, I don't know where it is. I'm gonna have to look
West
for
Side
it. So
style. Yeah,
yeah, so now I'm gonna have to earn each one of these inches, as opposed
yeah.
to like, oh, just start accelerating, throwing it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, people
Yeah.
go through with the prime movers like a lot of times they take over what should be working right and just use way too much momentum. I see you're very controlled with your guys. Like, what is your view on like the more general things as far as like tempo, frequency, split?
Typically, yeah. So typically, I mean, I probably tell people, like when we're warming up and stuff, I don't really care to see them, show me failure at a warm up rate. I'm always like, show me 8 to 10, 10 to 12 reps. I'm not really looking for anything more than 12 for pretty much anything. And at some point, I don't want to see anybody down into typically in fives and threes and
Yeah.
stuff. I'm not really interested in that. But generally, I'm starting to look at my working set in that 8 to 12 range is where I'm going to see like, okay, I'm going to start topping you out right in that space, somewhere between that rep range. And then it's back to, is this a main exercise for us? We're probably going to be doing a few more sets here, but once you start getting into that like hard working set, you're going to be like, okay, we're going to have to take some time off for this. Like I need recovery. And some people recover different. Some guys will recover faster for hamstrings. Some guys are faster for quads. And you have to kind of athlete by athlete figure that out. Otherwise you're just, okay, let's go again. And they're like, I haven't even recovered yet. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden now you have to back all that off. So sometimes I'm a big
Is the
fan of
volume
back
lower because of that?
offsets. Sorry.
Does your volume tend to be a little bit lower because of that?
Yeah, my volume will shift
Yeah.
back in that case because I'm like, there are recoveries. So I'm like, why am I adding all these other things? Or I'll start packing higher numbers. I'll do a back offset on some of those guys where I'm like, all right, go back to your warm up set, or a relatively heavier, not fully the warm up, but I might start, I don't know, let's say I've had a guy like when Robin started his leg curl, it was really a weak movement for him. And, he maybe started at 60 pounds and it was like he'd be working already. And so I'm like, well, this is a big, huge guy. And he's already working at 60 pounds. And so I can, fight really hard for like 200 pounds on leg curl. And so I'm like, relatively, I'm ridiculously stronger than you. What is happening? Right. So then we had to kind of chip away at that. And eventually, now he's warming up at probably 100 pounds. And by the time I'm getting close to the stack, I go right back to 100 pounds and say, now give me everything you have. I don't care what the number is. Like if you can
Yeah.
give me 20 reps, give me 20 reps. But it's his warm up weight. And so all of a
Yeah.
sudden he has a lot of courage to say, well, this isn't that heavy. Let's just focus on, keeping the reps the same speed. I don't really care about the range. Keep the reps the same speed. And I want you to just try and burn as much out of this as possible. And then my goal with that is to try and think about maybe for some people there's some endurance fiber that needs to be challenged, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm going to kind of exhaust something, not in the working out sets, but more in the
Mhm.
coming back
Yeah.
down. And then eventually it's like, oh, 60 becomes 80 for a warm up. Oh, becomes 100 for a warm, 120 becomes a warm up. Like I see guys that just all of a sudden start getting ridiculously strong. And you're just kind of taking the pyramid and saying, I need you to push this out a little bit. And when they see them gassing out, I'm like, yeah, okay, back offsets. Like they'll be like, my God, I got more out of a back offset
Yeah.
than I did my heavy set. I'm like, well, yeah, but you let yourself really kind of go after it with a set that you kind of go, oh, the weight is not the problem. I'm just going to just sit and exhaust this, right? And so I can use that for biceps, pecs. I did that in college because if you're a football player, it's like bench press and deadlift and
Mhm.
squats. You got to just put those numbers up. And so it's like, oh, back offsets just seem to get you really strong. So it's like, okay, I'll just start, you know, up goes the tree, and then whatever that tree was, go right back down to your starting weight, and then just rep it out, right? Just rep it out. I don't care if it's 40 reps, just show me what you can.
Yeah, something I used to do when I was younger before I like understood the concepts of it was I would try to get a weight that was super light and I would be like, I'm gonna fail at this number no matter what. And I would just, make it as hard as I could so it fell at that. And
Right, right,
later
right.
it's like you kind of understand like what's going on and like why that was like a good thing.
Yeah, yeah,
What do
yeah.
you like as far as frequency? You like one times a week, two times a week per body part? Are you more of like a bro split?
So again, a lot of the guys. So usually it's funny because the guys will if somebody's going to hire me, usually I say, I'm a coach. And some people say, like, oh, you don't want to say trainer? I'm like, no, no, I can train you. But if you're looking at a world class bodybuilder, they don't need a trainer. They need someone to look at their mechanics. So a lot of times I'm going to let them pick a lot of the splits. Like they'll come in and say, oh, you can change everything. We do whatever you want. And I'm like, okay, but if I change everything, how do you reproduce what we just did?
Yeah.
So a lot of times their splits are typically more what the athlete's already done. So if they're like, man, I do a bro split, I'm like, cool, man, I can pick that apart. Sometimes I make some suggestions of like, okay, this seems, but if it, I've been experimenting with doing probably twice a week for things like hamstring kind of stuff. Like I'm almost like You can bleed over a couple things.
Yeah.
It might not be like a full hamstring workout, but I'm going to put some hamstring in this, or um, areas that I see that are kind of bleed over areas. Nobody trains traps enough. And people are
Yeah.
like, what are
Me.
you talking about? I'm like, nobody trains traps enough. Serratus, another area that nobody really trains enough, um, that becomes kind of this bleed over area where it's like, oh, I'm doing serratus heavier on a back day, but I'm doing serratus lighter on a shoulder day. I'm doing traps heavier on a back day. It's like, okay. And versus everybody has trained lats. I'm like, yeah, but like lats are not the hardest thing to train. Getting your shoulder blades moving, now that's going to make everything work a lot better. So I might prioritize, on the guys that need more development, yeah, I'm going to do more heavier sets there. On guys that need less, but definitely need to kind of warm up their movement, yeah, I'm going to say, show me 2 sets. And then everything else is, heavier shoulder work, that kind of stuff. I mean, they might have a movement. Typically, I'm looking for one movement that they're going to have to go after. That's going to be my like big move, like the one I'm really building towards, where we're going to go heavier on that. And I need to make sure all the parts move properly before we
Exactly.
get there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Right.
I'm pretty similar.
Versus,
Yeah.
oh, it's the powerlifting people or the Olympic lifting. It's like we do all the hard, heavy lifts first, and then everything
Mhm.
else is accessory lifting. And I'm like, man, I want to like check the nuts and bolts before we go
Yeah.
after this. So I don't, the guys that want to go heavy, they'll say, you got to do that exercise first. And I'm like, I don't really describe to that. I'm usually doing all kinds of other fix it things all the way along to make sure, like, well, let's make
Yeah.
sure that's moving. Let's make sure that's moving
Exactly.
before I
Yeah.
ask you for the biggest, heaviest loads. I want all that stuff. You can feel it all, you understand it. And then funny enough, it's like, oh, that move is part of that move, is part of that move, is part of that move. Yeah, I did 4 or 5 things that are all building towards that one big move we're going to do today. And then that becomes the heavy, or that becomes the teaching thing we're doing today, or that's the theme of things that are going towards that. So usually I'll swap that around quite a bit. Like that's the one part I might wiggle around, where the guys pick the exercises and the guys have a where they're comfortable. Then I start changing the order just a little bit to make sure I'm seeing movement that I want before we get there, if that makes any sense.
What are one or two of the main, like, whether it's compensations or just training mistakes you see like the higher level guys make
Again, they
for
don't
whatever body part?
yeah, so they don't understand upward rotation. So they don't,
Yeah.
I'll do a trap movement. I think my Robin might have shown you or see if I've seen it, doing a cable, a low
Yeah.
cable trap movement from varying positions forward and backward, right? To challenge different motions. And obviously when the cable's behind you, you're seeing sort of clavicular stuff, and usually the big guys are definitely the heavies are like, can you give me that?
Yeah.
But when you start seeing that they don't really even understand that the shoulders aren't going up and down, that the shoulder blades are rotating, right? And so, a traditional trap movement, a shrug or something is just so poorly designed to get you any more motion. And then you get all this sort of, guys rolling their shoulders, try to get more space. And now you've got like, wait a minute, the bottom of the glenoids getting sheared, you don't realize the risk you're dealing with, for labrum to have some issues and stuff because it's a shrug. We're holding on to lots of weight, but you're bringing your shoulder blade up and this way, and your arm is being ripped down that way. So all of a sudden you change that angle, and all of a sudden that person has a much better movement. As I said, upper pec is upper pec, even kind of tying in like pecs, anterior delt, and bicep. Like they're like, oh, those are different parts. I'm like, are they though? Like if you look at where they attach on the humerus, you're kind of like, those are all really, really close
Yeah.
all together, and they all seem to be going the same direction. Like a low cable, cable bicep curl is like, well, you can't tell me your pec's not part of that. You can't tell me that that's not shoulder flexion. That's not a body drag kind of, elbow only thing. Like, well, if I just add shoulder flexion and all of a sudden, oh, I feel my pecs. And I'm like, should I not do that? I'm like, no, 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 you should put those together, right? It's like rear delt and scapular motion, but I'm training shoulders, not my back. And I'm like, they go together, and
Yeah.
they're kind of supposed to flow together, and one of the things I see that I think is brutal is scapular depression with abduction. So they're doing side lateral raises, but they're trying to keep their trap out a bit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so the impingement you're taking on at this point, because nobody even looks at a skeleton. So I'm like, it's just bro rules of, oh, you don't want that. You want to not have your scapular move at all. And I'm like, but you're pulling your AC joint down on top of your humerus and wondering why, with load and speed and wondering why that doesn't feel so good or why you're creating risk or why that produces so much upper trap because your upper trap is
Yeah.
dying to lift that space away, right?
I think a
And
lot
then
of people, right,
sometimes,
they try to overcorrect certain things, right? Like they know,
yeah,
okay,
like they're
maybe I don't
trying to
want
say
to
that's
elevate
bad.
and retract too much, but that's not the same thing as upward rotation, So
Yeah, yeah. Or even being out of the big one would be out of the plane. They don't understand the plane of the scapula, right?
yeah,
And that they think it's the same for every person. So you're not a giant, big barrel chested dude, right? You got lots
no,
of development. I can see you've got really nice looking caps on your shoulders. You got really well developed pecs. It's like, oh yeah, he moves pretty well, but he's not a barrel chested guy. So
yeah,
his shoulder blades are probably 15, maybe 20 degrees sort of facing front. So the plane of the scapula is 15 to 20 degrees in front of you, not like, oh, we're all shaped like a wall. So, you should be doing wall angels and stuff. I'm like,
yeah,
oh man, like that's, somehow we're supposed to be looking at the shoulder and thinking delt, right?
yeah.
I'm like, no, your shoulders, your clavicle and your
Mhm.
scapula and your humerus, right? Your shoulder's this. If you're a tailor, that's your shoulder,
I'd
right?
even throw
And
that
when
thoracic rib cage in there too, right? So that
yeah,
if you
you've
have
got a
that to glide
thoracic.
on,
You've got a rib cage angle and a control of that angle that's going to dictate that. But if they start changing and moving that, right? You see head
yeah,
bobbing and all the other stuff. You start moving that stuff around. They go, I don't know why I'm creating injury potential or why I don't see development the way I should. And it's like you don't move your shoulder blade like you don't abduct, right? And they called it a raise, so that tells you up and down. That's all I should pay attention to. And I'm like, last time I checked, when the aliens abduct you, they take you away, right? So shoulder abduction means away from the middle. So it's like, oh, you gotta go out. The up is the bonus part there. That's because it's heavy there, but they don't understand that. As I said, the enough nobody does ab training. That's another one that kind of baffles me, right? It's like so everybody's thinking, abs are in the kitchen, right? So I'm like, okay, well, everybody's shredded under here,
yeah,
right? If you diet enough, everybody's shredded. But you turn on and say you're worried about your abs getting too thick, I'm not sure I've ever seen that. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like your ab control sucks. So it looks like your abs are thick, but generally it's just bloated guts. So a lot of them think they're thick. It's like you just don't control your trunk very well.
yeah,
You don't control your breathing. You
yeah.
don't actually understand how to create a tube, right?
No.
You don't know how to create a tube. You don't know how to, I have guys that are, maybe 5'4". I've got one guy I'm thinking about right now. He's 5'4", 230, right? And so he's a 212, I guess that's the weight class. But I'm like, he's 5'4", and I'm like, why are you like constantly lifting your chest up? Like, sure enough, creates all these other dysfunctions for him. And I said, your rib cage is tiny, which no bodybuilder wants to hear. But I'm like, dude, like this is your superpower, and you're throwing it away.
It's good.
Someone said you're short, so they told him to pose
Yeah,
up. And
yeah,
I'm like, so everything you're doing is chest up for everything. And I'm like, yeah, what's this thing poking out the front of my rib cage? I'm like, that's your xiphoid. Like, it is open so much. His rib cage,
yeah.
which should be 90 degrees or less, right?
Pointed
His
out
rib
like
cage
that.
should be, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't even have a little xiphoid down there, right?
yeah, a
It's
little
like,
bit. Yeah,
oh,
there's a
he's
little one.
super tiny, right? But how many
Yeah,
guys do you see when they get lean enough and
yeah.
the rib cage is standing at
That ice age
120
just flares
plus,
up. Yeah,
like 120 plus, and then you wonder why they have like apnea, they don't breathe real well.
hmm
It's like, I don't know, dude, your rib cage never closes,
yeah.
so their breathing is all this sort of tidal front volume, right?
Do
Just
you
more
do a lot of
like
breathing?
yeah. So
Yeah,
they
because
do
this.
this pump handle breathing, and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah. That's it.
like, dude, you don't
Up to the
actually
neck.
like remember. Yeah, just my neck. It's because my neck. It's why I don't breathe so well. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, how about we do some stuff to actually get your rib cage to come down? So you treat him, and I give him some exercises, and his rib cage goes from 150 degrees at the sternum, right? 150 plus, like it's almost like wow, that is crazy, down to this like 90 minus, and all of a sudden his waist, which looked really
Right.
wide, all of a sudden doesn't look so wide, right? And all of a sudden this 230-pound monster little guy has an X here. versus he looks like the letter H. Do you know what I mean? Right.
Yeah,
And so it's
exactly.
like, oh, yeah, wouldn't it be nice to get a smaller waist? Oh, that's going to come with my diet. I'm like, no, that's not going to come with your diet. Yeah, part of it will, but sure enough, don't move well, don't have trouble posing, look like a giant dude, but you're not, and you've thrown away this small, tiny rib cage, which is actually your superpower, right? Like you should be able to look like, my God, how
Yeah,
big
that's
are these
awesome.
shoulders?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
instead, he poses and everything goes out wide, right? And they get kind of weirdly stuck in this vacuum thing where I'm like, if I have to see any more girl pictures where the shoulders are up
Yeah.
here, I'm like, wow, what is happening? Like nobody sees this, like I'm trying to get my waist to be narrow. I'm like, you're back bending across the room.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and it can
like,
create a descended pelvis where your visceral just starts to get pushed forward too. So you got the
yeah,
flared rib
yeah,
cage, and then you got the
yeah.
your guts out to the front. Now, let me
And
ask
then
you
as soon
this.
as they breathe, it just goes
Yeah,
boom.
exactly. Every
And then they
little
go,
even
oh, it's because I'm, and I'm like, you don't, I mean, your guts want to come out anyway, right? It's your job of your muscles to tighten, right, against your viscera. Otherwise, your guts do want to blow out,
yeah,
right? And they're under pressure for a reason. But you don't understand how to control it. You don't train abs, right? And I don't just mean rectus, and I just mean they don't understand how to wrap their rib
yeah.
cage, and they don't know how to
Obliques,
breathe down there.
transverse. Yeah,
Yeah, and again, if you start using your serratus, guess what? Your serratus is woven in with your obliques. So if you start really allowing your shoulders to move and or start really understanding reaching your shoulder, oh look, I can rotate better. I can do this quarter turn thing better. I can, all of a sudden I can breathe better. It's like, yeah, well, you just attached your obliques from here to here. I think you might have some help,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And so
So
again, if they just say, "Oh, my entire posing is trying to keep my chest up and my shoulders from not moving," I'm like, man, that's creating a lot of dysfunction, right? And then sure enough, yeah, like you were saying, one of your other YouTubes was like, yeah, you're going to see weird development. You're going to see missing developments. Like I don't have that part of my shoulder developed. I don't have that part of my scapular stuff doesn't develop. I move a lot of weight though, right?
right.
But I got this big underhang, nothing up top. My delts don't have these caps, right? Because I don't know how to orient all that stuff.
Now, you mentioned getting the rib cage to kind of, reset a little bit. We can say like by not being so flared. To me,
Yeah,
that means you're gaining some expansion. Now, let me ask you this: as like MAT practitioner, do you do that first ever, and then does the muscle activation, like the muscle testing, change just off of that? Because that's one of the reasons why I don't do as much of the MAT as I used to, because I've found that if you can really get the axial skeleton to reset certain times, certain ways,
sure,
the muscle length, and it's not as concentrically oriented because it's not as
sure,
in that position that it has to be moving you through space. And then a lot of times I can get a change in that muscle testing off of that change. Not all the time. Sometimes I still got to do it, but for me, I've seen I can get changes across the board sometimes by just resetting the
yeah. So
pelvis or
sometimes
the
it
rib
might be
cage.
more. Yeah, sometimes it might be more. I can see something change in the moment. Now, does it, check 5 minutes later,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Has it reset itself, right? And so it's like, oh, I created a temporary change, which, and again, this is no knock on anybody's therapy or whatever,
yeah.
but it's like I've had chiropractors, when I'm being a dick, it's like, oh, I look, their pelvis is level now. And I'm like, okay, have them walk down the hall
Right.
and come back. Do
Exactly.
you ever check again? They're looking at me like, what do you mean? Why would I need to check? I already fixed it. I'm like, why don't you ask them to squat, ask them to
Yeah,
sneeze,
exactly.
ask them to cough, and then get back on the table and see, did it
Mhm.
change? Do you ever check? No, because I'm already moving on to my next client,
Yeah.
my next patient's here. And I'm like, so come back in 2 days and oh, look, it didn't hold. And I'm like, it maybe didn't hold like for seconds,
Instantly. Yeah.
right?
Could be the
It
shoes,
might
could
have been
be,
like,
yeah,
get them to jump up and down, stand back in their orthotics. Let's see what that looks like now. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I could start throwing all kinds of darts and say, I don't know. Do you think that's gonna happen? I don't know, but did you test it? Did you try? Like when you fix something, whatever that means, now try and break it.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of funny because now
Exactly.
we're like, okay, now don't do anything. And I'm like, but they're
No.
gonna go to the gym. Like, you have them in the lab right now. Do you want to break it in the lab, or are you gonna let them
Yeah.
go out in the field and they're gonna break it anyway? And then you're like, oh wow, okay, well come on back in. Like, do you think you could do something? Like, well, let's see, those lower ribs seem to be more in respiration, and let's get you started to do some deeper exhales, or let's see you really volumize some stuff, or let's put you in a posturally intense something, or when does your pain come out? Oh, when I do an overhead something. Okay, well, show me an overhead something. Like, the bottom of my squat, I feel like I lose my breath. Okay, well, show me the bottom of your squat. Let's see. Like, it's almost like, give me the program of what can't you do. That's really what I'm more interested in, right? What can't you do? Because I'm not really done until I kind of go, okay, we've got you stable enough or strong enough or able to maintain the correction with the stress you're going to put it on, right? Otherwise, it's great. Just don't go play sports. It's great. Just don't
Just
lift,
don't live. Don't live your life.
Yeah. Don't hold your breath. Oh, don't sit on the toilet. That's what, right? Sell your house. You have stairs, sell your house, take away stairs, right? And so that's what I see. A lot of therapists are not going to challenge stuff, right? Or their tool doesn't even have an option for that,
Yeah.
right? And so the athlete or the person, is like, oh, I'm great till I start working out again.
Yeah.
Now, is it a problem with what you're working out, or did something actually not correct?
Yeah.
Right now, I don't know, right? It could be doing shitty things in the gym. Aha, there's one of our answers, right? And sometimes it's like, no, that looks pretty solid, or yeah, you feel you're supposed to feel it, but no, yeah, you broke your correction again. Okay,
Yeah.
now I've got to figure it out. And again, I'm going to take it on in the lab, as much as I can, because they're going to go throw it against the wall, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't try that. Sorry, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I have the exact same kind of approach. Now, I want to go back to the pecs real fast. You
Sure.
said that like upper pecs is pretty big problem area. Is that more
Yeah.
execution or exercise selection in your opinion?
So a lot of execution. Execution is kind of the number one. Angling and again, this sort of, how can I move more weight, but I don't feel it where I'm supposed to feel it. Almost like everything tries to become a decline, right? Everybody tries.
Yeah.
You said upper pec and you said incline press, but now you're trying to turn it into a decline press in the middle of an incline press. So now it's like looking at somebody calling that a shoulder press and they're angled over the back of the chair, and you're like, that's a weird chest press right now. Like, I'm doing so much weight in my shoulder press. I'm like, how is that a shoulder press? Like, you're literally angled over making this chest press. Whereas like, hey, why don't you stay straight, hold your rib cage? And they're like, oh, well, then I can't move any weight. I'm like, dude, but where do you feel it? Oh, all in my shoulders. I'm like, so I would say that execution and choices, kind of go hand in hand there, because they don't understand, how to hold the rib cage, right? So they don't understand how to create a tube. They let go of that.
Or they overbear, right? You see that
Yeah,
sometimes
or
where
they overbear. Yeah,
overbear.
yeah. But that sense of like,
Which is rare.
there's
Yeah.
there's that. Yeah, and that's much more rare. But then again,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that sort of like everything's all
Yeah.
the guys that I'm probably more dealing with on a pro level, are still or that sort of sub pro level are still trying to like, man, I need this to
Yeah.
explode, and so they don't understand how to keep it under tension. Some of the again, they fall back to athletics, right? Just move stuff, right? And so I'm like, man, I just start screwing with the strategies of like, well, I'm going to tell you where to stop now. I'm going to tell you stop here. Now go back up. Stop here. Now go back up. And so all that hyper attention of stopping and starting means you have to hold it under tension. That's it. Eventually I'll take the training wheels of me off, and you're holding it there the whole time. And now I say I might put my finger in there to stop you. So now they have to be ready for that. Well, what are they doing? They're just keeping it under tension, right? And where do you feel it? Oh man, like the chest is purple, And it's like, well, I guess there's a lot of blood there now. And they're like, oh, I can't. And then you see failed reps, and I can only do them for okay, racket, great. Where did you feel that? Oh man, all the way across, Or I'll do on a pec deck, normally a standard pec deck, right? I'll say, okay, I'll do variations of single arm stuff or holding one and moving the other. But I'll play with it a little more where you're actually having to brace and do a single arm, right? Now you have a potential for scapular protraction, but it means you can go past midline, right? You can go past midline. And all the guys that like to retract their shoulder blades can't do anything, right? They're like,
Yeah.
shit, I can't, what do you mean go all the way over there? But then I'll tell them to push up on the handle.
Yeah.
And as soon as you decide to push up on the handle, it's like, but it doesn't go that way. I'm like, I know, but try and lift the handle. And as soon as they do, I say, maintain that slight push up, that intention of pushing up. Oh, I feel on my upper pec.
Yeah.
Unless lifting up means this. And as soon as they lift the
exactly.
chest up, I'm like, oh, that's not what I asked for. Right? They said lifting up. Oh, yeah, I'm lifting my chest up. I'm like, no. I need you to keep your rib cage where it is. and lift your shoulder up, right? And then all of a sudden, like, oh, whoa, I've never felt that like right where I want to put it. And so now I'm like, okay, great. My job's kind of done. Now we just get to count reps and, make you stop and start and all the other fancy stuff, right? But if you just said, we're just going to do reps till you finally feel your upper pec, I'd be like, okay, still the same strategy of putting it in
Yeah.
lower, lower, lower. So I'm almost always, try and find ways to kind of jailbreak the equipment, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is the code on this piece of equipment. Now let me get the code of you on this piece of equipment. Now jailbreak those. Okay, skill unlocked. Boom. Now you know how to put it there. Now just keep doing it, right?
Yeah.
Don't fall in the trap of, oh, but if I put more weight on there, it's like, did you feel where? No, I didn't feel where I was supposed
Yeah.
to feel.
So
Right?
with your guys, I mean, you've got a mixed rep, but you got some really high level athletes.
Sure.
Do you notice that some of them they definitely get better at it, and some of them are already pretty good right away, but there's definitely some people who just can't connect to the sense of like not letting themselves push themselves close to failure without getting into that compensatory movement, whether it's
Yep.
flaring the rib cage, or some people they can get right to that brink of threshold and let themselves fail. I always tell them like this is a hard thing I'm asking of you. I'm basically trying to have you override survival mechanisms. Your body wants
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
expend the least
yeah.
amount of energy to accomplish a task, and I'm telling you not to do that. So I understand why it's very
Yeah. We
hard.
go back to the disadvantage of bodybuilding, right? It's like your brain's like, dude, man, I can make this easier for you. I can bring in some other guys. And you're like, no, 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 only this guy. But we won't be able to do as much. And we can't, he's burning out. Shouldn't we save him? It's like, no, 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 let him drown. It's kind of like, can you embrace the suck of putting it right where you're supposed to put it? And most guys, my experience, they're already pro bodybuilders, these big, huge guys. They're already very successful. So I have a little bit of room to say, okay, they've already accomplished a bunch of stuff. They actually can lift weights. They obviously can put on muscle. They are athletic. It's not like they have no development, right? But it's like I don't have enough in one spot. How do I, how am I not doing whatever I'm doing? I'm doing all the numbers. I'm doing all the machines. Why is it not going where I want it? So I can say, oh, we have to peel this back a little bit because I'm going in as this authority coach to figure out what you're doing wrong to a guy that's already getting an A plus,
Yeah.
but he's looking for an A plus plus. So it's like, oh, okay, well, let's figure it out. And so kind of getting them to, as you said, kind of do this thing they're not really plugged in for. It's like, hey, your body's you're a great athlete. Your body already wants to cheat. Your body also, but it's not cheating to your body. It's just more like, man, I'm going to find one way to keep him going as best I can. So if I kind of explain that to them, they might kind of buy in different. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're just like, oh, you're never gonna, match this or you're never gonna match that, they're like, oh, watch me. Like if you challenge them the wrong way, you kind of encourage them to find any way to survive this, right? And so you have to kind of say, listen, I'm looking for this. I don't care about range. Drop that. Like if it feels like I could keep the range, but I lose the feeling, drop that. Eventually, I'm going to want that feeling and the range. Eventually, I'm going to that feeling the range and the reps. The initial part is like I just need to like almost take the pressure off the performance side of it so that they can focus just on like, wow, even if I only move 1 inch, but it goes right where I'm supposed to go, then eventually 1 inch will be 2 inches. Eventually that'll be a full rep. Eventually, that to them, that's sort of the candy, right? Because it's like, oh my God, I finally feel it where I'm supposed to feel it. I'm just not that strong yet, right? And if I let all my other strong stuff get in there, all of a sudden I start losing that feeling again, right? And so as long as you can kind of play that line with them, that's usually where I see like, okay, they'll buy in,
Do you
because if I
find
can
like
target that,
you find that even if they're bought in, right, there might be some people who just they can go to those partials and you can squeeze partials out, where some other people is like once they're close to failure, like they just you got to kind of got to stop once they're one RIR maybe because they whether it's the personality type sometimes like type A
yeah,
people
probably,
or
yeah,
maybe it's actual physical stuff too, but I find that a
yeah,
lot of times the type A people that just want to fucking run through walls they do not let
yeah,
themselves
yeah,
get to
yeah.
that real failure in the partials. It's like you said, they fight
Yeah,
to
yeah,
keep the
you got to
range.
kind of, yeah, you got to watch your athlete and kind of like, who am I really talking to here?
Yeah, so I
Like
do like rest
there's,
pauses and stuff.
yeah, there's a couple of strategies you got to kind of build in around. There's more than one way to do this. Let's, versus this is the rep range, this is the number, this is the, you will stop at this number. Like some of those people blow the crap out of that stuff. But if I said, look, our job is to exhaust this. Your job is to get more out of less. Your job is to not somehow figure out how to get 12 more reps
Yeah.
because you're so muscular, so good at trying to find a way around this. I need you to kind of turn that off for a second. And if I can get one set where they really explore that, then it's like, oh, okay, wait a minute. My if I just go to another place, I'm like, no, no, I need you to stay in this place. I don't need you to go somewhere else. Because it's that going somewhere else that all of a sudden they just, I just went into this other plane of existence and somehow magically 10 more reps. I was like, yeah, you put it over there, you put it over there,
Should
you
never
put it
get
over there.
easier
Like,
towards the end of a rep, bro.
yeah, like somehow you leaving your body was not what I'm interested in. Like I want you to stay in it and keep it there. And so for me, that's like, oh, that's concentration meditation. Yeah, you're going down a deeper place of don't let it off. I want you to hold it there so that you don't let it off. I'll give away all those other volume to keep you doing how well I want it. I'll give up how many. I'll give up how
Yeah,
far. I'll give up
me
how
too.
heavy. I'll just give
I'll
up
just
all
stop
those
in the middle
others.
of a set. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be like, good man, that was great. Oh, but I didn't do 12. I'm like, I don't care. I
Yeah.
like stop right there, right? I'll give you a rest. We get another chance, right?
Right.
And so eventually, if you keep the quality so high, and again, we go back to logbooks and how do you see that on a video? Like one guy's getting everything in person, you're watching it, he's getting everything. And I look over and the camera's filming like a Panada logo, and I'm like, okay, you didn't like you didn't catch the nuance of what we're really trying to do, that they are exhausted, like they didn't squirm out of any of that, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, versus just look at all the weights flying around and all the muscles squeezing, let's film that.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously that's a hard thing to translate across YouTube or whatever, but if you know what you're looking at, you're like, oh man, he didn't get out of that one, right?
Well,
you
that's
know
pretty good lead in. I'm gonna pull up a couple. I think I got a couple videos where you get some pretty good
sure.
cues and where you can kind of maybe just kind of share what you're cueing and the benefits. So let me see. I'm so bad with this shit. Let's see if I got this going good.
Oh god, it's better you than me. Better you than
Okay,
me.
I think we're good. All right,
Look how
you're able to see.
beautiful you look in that picture. Whoa.
Oh, that was classic physique days back in the
Yeah.
day. Okay, so let's check this out. We're already in.
Board
Okay,
shorts.
yeah, those were the old classic physique. I do have board shorts. I only did physique because there wasn't classic at the time. I never would have done physique if there
Okay.
was
There you
another
go.
option.
You're like, this is my option.
That
I'm
was
not a
it.
heavyweight. I'm
Yeah,
not a heavyweight.
exactly. I'm only like 5 pounds above the classic limit too.
Oh, wow.
So let me see. Do we have sound on this?
Look how small Robin is right here. Oh my
Is this
gosh.
pretty odd?
He's a giant now.
So I'm gonna let you kind of
So
talk about what you're queuing on this.
yeah, so a lot of this, most people are doing an overhead tricep thing, and they're gonna set up the cable from probably about waist height, right? And they're going to try and really focus on that sort of upward motion. But what I'm really telling Robin to do with this high position is that there's still challenge on the shoulder, because if you see the moment arm stuff, like the distance of the actual, like where the delt is, the distance on the GH joint to that cable is still pretty high, right? But it's trying to pull him up. I'm telling him to throw this across the room, right? And so most people, when they get to this position, their shoulder will drop backwards, and I'm actually telling him to protract through the humerus. So if he can get that shoulder blade to slide out, you'll still feel almost like a serratus, like, whoa, my
Mhm.
serratus is doing something. Then you can get this sort of challenge to the scapula. Then you get a challenge to your long head. And then you sort of get that finish out over the top. And you can see he's put the slidey handle that we have here is that sort of band is at the very top. Sometimes people they don't think about where that handle
Yeah.
strapping is, right? Because even that is like a 1 inch difference if the strapping's on the other side or the strapping's on the underside, right? And so we're kind of doing this protracted, shoulder throwaway, almost like if you're going to throw a soccer ball,
Yeah.
right? And his job is to now keep bicep kind of facing up, right? So that's all that rotator cuff challenge so that he can just get forearm on a stable upper arm.
Man, he was skinny here, huh? I don't know when this
Oh
one for
yeah.
him,
I mean, he's not skinny to me. He's
for
not skinny to
him,
me,
yeah.
but he's skinny to where he is now for sure.
Yeah.
Looks like
Yeah,
baby Robin right now.
exactly. And so this is a max weight set with you. I think you're with
Yeah.
him, right? So
Yep.
what are you queuing him on right here?
So typically, Robin has been having a little issue around sort of the path of motion around the knee. So he'd been dealing with a little bit of stuff in his big toe on that right foot. And so he'd start to kind of spin his foot around a little bit. And so what you see me kind of grabbing his knee and what I'm actually coaching, what happens on this sled type stuff, these hack squat is everybody gets focused on the sled, kind of like Pilates, right? They start focusing on the moving part when the reality is like, what is moving the sled? Because your shoulders aren't pushing the sled. Your shoulders are attached to the sled. Your back is attached to the sled. The sled's moving space to the world, but the one thing that's moving it is his knees are actually bending towards the mirror, right? He's bending and unbending his knees and ankles. The sled is going up and down as a result of that. So I'm kind of encouraging him to think about folding his ankles versus dropping the sled. I've got him trying to not focus on the movement of the sled at all.
And is this like an in set where he's doing partials? Or this is where you have him doing this full set?
No, this right. This is his again. This might even happen like day to day or workout to workout. That's his full. That's his full
Yeah,
range right there.
yeah,
And people
exactly.
get really like, "Oh, that's
Right.
not full range." I'm like, "Dude, that's full range. That's what he's got."
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So
It's
if he
crazy.
shows me that, that's what I'm going to say. That's his full range. Great. He's still getting to relative 90 degrees here,
Yeah,
you know, and it's a shit ton of effort. A lot of times with this, we'd even band this, like not reverse band, like we would actually band it
yeah.
to make it heavier
Nobody
versus
does that
offloading the
anymore.
bottom.
Nobody does that
Yeah,
anymore. I do that stuff
no,
too.
I know. I make it heavier. It's like, oh, they reverse band it now. Now it's everything's all that.
Now, this is you
Oh yeah,
doing
there's a
some alternating. I'm a huge fan of alternating single arm,
yeah.
reciprocal kind of stuff. Is this
Yeah,
something
I
you
never
do
actually
often, or
got on this piece. I never got on this piece of equipment until like one of my
at the
guys was
Arsenal
playing
or
with
a
it,
different one?
and I was like, oh, I've never even tried this thing because I've got these super, monkey arms. So it's always
They do
like,
look pretty long.
is this is this thing even built for me? Like, what the? So I started playing with like, oh, okay, this is definitely heavy enough. Can you hold one and move the other? I love equipment where generally I'll say to people, like, you can hold one of these. Nobody ever holds one side. They're like, oh, the handles are independent. You can do this separately, right? But
So are
again,
you?
if they never
Yeah,
trained any trunk and spine, they never train any trunk and spine. You can see he's already having some struggling here with
yeah,
the
exactly.
with the he's got a
So
block, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm not used to stabilizing anything, right? And you
what
can
are the?
see just him starting to
Yeah,
lift that chest flare again, right?
yeah.
Now
Yeah,
that's so
look a
normal
lot
for
different
him.
than you. Do
Yeah,
you,
that's so normal for him. It's like, whoa, I'm not even used to stabilizing anything there.
so do you incorporate, like I know Robin did some single arm work too. Is this something you incorporate with your guys?
Yep. Yep.
What are the
Typically,
main
again,
benefits for you?
once you start incorporating more trunk work, and I don't necessarily mean, hey, they need big obliques, right? But it's like, hey, you actually have to learn to hold some stuff. I mean, the weird part is they want to get under, 600-pound squats or, deadlift 800 pounds. And I'm like, nobody trains their middle. I'm like, guys, like, oh, I do some hyperextensions at the end. I'm like, what? Or maybe I do them once in a while. And I'm like, what? Like, you don't know how to, modify anything? Like, what are you doing? Now, this one, we're doing kind of changing some positions here. A lot of the
Yeah, from the
guys here would
foot,
ask
right?
me, yeah, I'm changing sort of the angle to the pad. A lot of the guys are, they'll ask me, I want to fill in my adductors, right? So more guys are doing more adductor work than they ever thought. But it's typically Magnus that you're really trying to get developed, right? And
Yeah.
so Magnus is a great extensor as well, right?
Mhm.
And so that means if you turn open and you start, in this position, he's kind of sloped back, and I'm allowing his hips to sort of pelvis to rock back a little bit, and I'm actually asking him to almost push at the bottom of the pad, and I'm asking him also very slightly to push down on the seat posts, like on the foot posts, so that if he
Yeah.
adds an extension challenge, not so crazy that he's going to like try and bend the thing, but just enough. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I don't feel my flexor adductors at all. I feel it all down in Magnus, right? You'll
And I
get
think on
longus and Magnus
yeah.
as well.
And I think on this one too, you're cueing him to kind of squeeze the abductors on the in range. I think this was the one. Is
Yeah,
that
I'm
right?
actually
Yeah.
asking him to. Yeah, so a lot of people don't. So I had to ask a lot of guys. They never even considered stuff like this. Like I need you to actively stretch, and they're like, What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Squeeze your butt. When you get all the way out there, I want you to squeeze your butt." And they're like, what? I'm like, "Yeah, you want to load something. You need to train the handoff. So I'll ask them to literally ask themselves to widen this position, because otherwise they're just letting the weight push them out wider.
Mhm.
And it's almost like a concentric curl that you don't worry about putting it down. You just
Yeah,
think
exactly.
picking it up is the big deal. You know what I
So
mean? And
are you
so,
thinking about this on other movements like as
yeah,
well?
yeah,
On
I do a
everything or
lot
what?
of it on like seated leg curl,
Yeah.
even on lying leg curl. I'm like, yeah, squeeze your quad when it's
Yeah.
fully straight. I want you to actively straighten your hamstring, right? So if you squeeze your quad, you're going to have to lengthen your hamstring under load,
Or some
right?
reciprocal inhibition
Yeah,
benefits.
I need a reciprocal relationship for that joint to, again, continue to be healthy and have them. And right away, for most people, if you're not used to doing it, oh my God, that's an intensifier right off the
Yeah,
bat,
it is.
right?
Now, I really like that you use the wedges for your hinges. I don't see a ton of people doing that. What is the
Yeah,
reason
so
you like that?
so it's funny. I ended up working with Juji a
Ah,
number
I
of
saw
years,
that.
well, maybe a year and a bit ago. And the funny part, he asked me, hey, here's some exercise. It was on his rest day. So he said to me, listen, I don't want to do anything heavy, but I really want to work out with you, but I don't really want to do anything heavy. This is the one day off I have. I was like, oh, okay. And he goes, well, can we just do, there's a couple exercises that I don't understand or that I'm not good at, which is crazy because he's like
Yeah.
ridiculously athletic. But he said, I'm, I can't feel stiff leg deadlifts. I can't feel an RDL. I have no feeling for it. Meanwhile, he's ridiculously flexible. Like he's
Yeah.
doing like overhead snatch grip press while he's in the full
The
splits.
splits.
So I'm like, so he said, yeah, they had me working on deficit. And they had me with my toes up, and it's kind of poorly taught, right? And so I had these guys actually facing downhill because they don't understand how to actually like push on their legs. Most people say, "Oh, stick your bum to the back wall," right? And all they do is rock back on their heels. And so I'm actually saying, I need you to actually step on the insides of your feet here so that you have as flat a foot and you
Huge
embrace
mistake.
internal rotation, right? And
Everybody
so
goes to the
when
outside. All the girls, right? They always want to go
yeah,
to
they
the
all go to the
outside.
outside. And so I'm like, no, I need you to be on the inside so that your adductors are pointed to the back wall, right? That magnus has to be pointed to the back wall. That means these are, and usually I'm standing behind a dude when I say this is a cheeks open exercise.
Yeah.
This is not a hungry bum exercise. This is literally do not squeeze your butt. That's the
Yeah.
funny part because when they squeeze the butt, they're externally rotating the back on their heels again.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, man, this is not a position I want to be taking all that weight into where I'm back on my heels. And then they just, put it on the floor and they call it a stretch. But I'm like, you're not even lowering it with your hamstrings, right? You're just usually riding this on your back and you're rocking so much on that heel point that you'll see the toes flare up like crazy. I'm like, no, I need your whole foot down. And
Yeah.
as soon as I put them downhill, they can't rock back anymore. They can push their hips back, but they're pushing down the hill to do it. So that kind of takes their, instead of going over and following the bar down, you can see me coaching. His head has to go towards the mirror. So he's maintaining his neutral spine better than the other guy was, but he's
Yeah, that's why I
maintained
got
that.
him going. He looks good.
Yeah, he's doing a great job. Carl was fighting it there. He was fighting that middle, but he'd never, to be fair, he'd never done it this way.
Yeah.
So this is actually he's was a former gymnast. This one, he's a
Oh
big
wow.
boy for a former
Wow.
gymnast,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
but he, yeah, like you were little when you did gymnastics, but he's very, very physically able, very athletic. But that
And the
sense of, oh, I need his tail and his head to almost maintain the same
yeah.
relationship, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, this is really pretty. And then you obviously with the ramp, you'll have more access for inter rotation as he's getting more into that hinge too.
Yeah, so that introtation is pretty much like magic for most people,
Uh,
especially when they're on 2 feet. They don't bother to embrace it at all. And I'm
uh,
like, almost everything you're asking for is whole foot into rotation so those hips can open and you can actually get those hamstrings to go into, a position of extension. Whether it's
and
a
you,
squat or a leg
yeah,
press or whatever, it's like there's just so
right.
much rocking around on their feet.
And people, like you said, really big point. I tell people stop squeezing your ass all the time because like
Yeah,
they just drive that posterior tilt and the lumbar flexion. It's like just hip
yeah.
extension. The glutes will contract like naturally as you get to the full hip extension. You don't want
Yeah,
to
it's
like
almost fighting
pull
it
it.
off, right? You
Yeah,
have to kind of
exactly.
tell them because you
Yeah.
said your max is squeezing from a position of lengthen, right?
Yeah.
So I'll say pockets in if I don't want to say cheeks open and somebody freaks out or something. I'll say pockets in. So your front pockets have to go in. The more you hinge, the more your front pockets are going in. And that means the back is opening up. But when you say butt squeeze, what are you seeing? They go into full external rotation in the wrong segment. It's
Yeah.
like you're not even getting behind you. Like you're squeezing, like when your body's still in front. That butt squeeze doesn't happen until you've literally kind of exploded out of it. And in any of those positions, you're never going to visit that.
I
Now
like
this
the
one here,
cheeks open. I'm going to
this
use cheeks open.
yeah, I know cheeks open just becomes fun to be honest, right? Just becomes fun to say that and be like, I don't mean it in a bad way. Now this she's doing this again abduction, and I'm telling her to take these posts and actually like full shoulder flex into the posts. So as
So
she
what you
goes
mean? You're telling her to
around,
push into it, or what do you mean?
I'm telling her to push the posts.
Yeah,
So they
yeah,
actually move in this arc because typically this motion feels like the whole arc of the machine is in front of you. But if you see somebody start to lift their chest up and the shoulder starts rolling, you'll see the bicep going into external rotation, right? So they'll end up be moving in an arc that's the opposite of what the machine does. So you have, even though this looks like a mobile handle, that's a relatively fixed handle, which
yeah.
means you have to move your shoulders on an axis to match the machine. Otherwise, you're going up and outwards and the machine is staying forwards. And you're going to see this sort of weird battle of like, my poor elbow has to deal with that because my
Yeah.
bicep is turning out as I abduct, but my hands are stuck in. So
Okay.
how am I gonna reconcile that? So it looks like a mobile handle. It's not. It's a moving fixed handle, if that makes any sense. Now this one, the machine is designed to obviously face the other way, right? This is sort of a front press kind of thing. And I said, "Hey, you've ever ridden in this backwards?" And she's like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah." Now this is going to feel a little more like sort of lateral, anterior lateral delt, right? It's not going to be front delt because we're not. This position is still like elbows out, but I'm cueing her to snap her elbows shut. And what people do on this machine or any of these shoulder presses is feel where their hands are. Now, by the time she gets to the top, this is kind of like a Y press, right? Because she's actually starting to finish. She's finishing here. She's not finishing like a dumbbell or something over top. So she finishes in a Y press. I'm just cueing her to move her elbows only and not pay attention where her hands are because her hands feel like up and down, but her elbow path is basically following that bicep in and out, right? I'm
That
guarding
sounds
her
good.
from basically saying, oh, don't go down, just think out and back in.
Now,
And
are you
once she
thinking the
starts,
in on other presses or just this wider
yeah,
one?
no, I mean, I do on other presses as well. Now the machine is a restraint, right? Because it's not, it's only going to travel in the arc. It's going to travel. There's no convergence on this one, right?
Yeah,
So if I have a machine with convergence, I'm like, oh yeah, you better be thinking that you
yeah,
have to converge, right? On a machine that you don't, it's like, all right, I'll converge and I'll stay in that wide press position,
like that.
right?
See if
But
there's
if you
anything
start thinking
else.
up, you're right back in the same thing where everything is just follow your hands. And then people start to come below the plane, change all these orientation
Yeah,
strategies, right?
get
And
that big
now it's
range of
like, oh,
motion.
how do I get more range? I'm like, but the machine doesn't even allow for that,
Yeah.
right? You've got a machine that you're now kind of migrating to something completely different.
Well, check
Now
out
on
one
this
more.
one,
What do you got going on with this
yeah,
guy?
on this one, again, fairly simple. I'm starting to play, and you can't see this on the thing. I'm asking him to play where he pushes. So he's starting to want to posteriorly tilt here right away, right? And I'm actually coaching him to stay and almost feel like he's pushing up off the seat. And what most people do is they drive backwards into the chair, right? They tuck under, drive back like a shitty hip thrust,
Yeah,
right? And so I'm actually telling him to stay in a fairly because you see how his knees are much higher than his hips right now,
yeah.
right? His knees are much higher than his hips. So I'm telling him to stay as upright as I can possibly get,
And
right?
so, what happened with the change you just made there? Are you no longer pushing up from the toes?
Yeah, so what I want him to do is kind of maintain that. And now I'm playing with him being able to just push out and rest his legs there versus and now I want you to start pushing down. So it doesn't translate to you guys because it's like, well, nothing's changing. And it's like, oh,
Yeah,
internally there's a lot changing, right?
yeah,
So I'll play with because most people are just going to push down and overload this as an extension thing, and they're like, oh, it's not heavy enough. I'm like,
yeah,
just let your legs rest there and actually truly understand like glute med min here, right? And in some cases, in this one, I'll even raise the seat. Like it
yeah,
doesn't come, but I'll get a little set seat to get up higher to try and get their hips higher than their knees. And then
yeah.
all of a sudden, whoa, that's a whole different exercise again.
Are there any like really specific cues that you find yourself going through most often?
Uh, it's almost like once you start seeing certain athletes, I would definitely say any of the abduction stuff, let your legs just rest. Let your legs just lay there because most people are starting to change the plane so much, trying to find advantage and or trying to accelerate loads so they can get wider. And I'm like,
Yeah.
but wider how? Like you're throwing and catching, right? And so they don't visit all the way in on an abduction. They don't actually adduct. They just sort of stay in this middle range of shoving with speed and then
Yeah.
go, oh, I obviously need more weight. And I'm like, okay, but you're not even going all the way in to squeeze back out. But if I go all the way in, I won't be able to go all the way back out. I'm like, that's what we're trying to embrace here, right? And so things like that, when you start seeing accelerated loads or strategies they're employing to find a different way to push on a pad, right? Or I'm pushing on the foot plate, not the pad. It's like, oh, that's you're starting to if I can catch those things, I'm like, oh no, that's not, I want you to move a certain pace. And as soon as you put time on them, some of those big arcing movements, as soon as you put a time challenge on them, they have to, it's like, oh, this sucks. Right. So when you start seeing, not that you'd want to do slow wood chops, but you know what I mean? You start seeing like, oh, these big arcing motions, and the person's like starting to have different speeds through different motions. I'm like, well, then you're not squeezing it there. You're throwing and catching. I mean, you're throwing where you're good. We got a good moment challenge. You're throwing in a middle range and you're catching in an end range where you're short. But now this trying to do full range, like that's not full range anymore. You're breaking your own rule, right? You've changed the way you did it to get more distance, but do less work, right? And so it's like, well, the whole thing is when it gets shorter, I don't want to get there. I was like, well, then go slower. I'll slow it down. I'll challenge that. Hold that. Stops and starts. Momentum stuff is probably the one thing that you see most people robbing themselves of more than anything else, right? Change in momentum right away as the athlete. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, there it is. You start changing pace. Nope. Go right back down. Go, like, oh no, do it with my pace. And then I talk really slowly. I want you to move slow. And they're like, oh, like,
Yeah.
no, I'm counting one. And they're like, oh.
I love
So
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
any momentum stuff that generally quality control right away, jump on that. If you see somebody or the athlete themselves is paying attention, like, oh, I all of a sudden started to speed up instantly. That you catch yourself there, quality goes up, right? Numbers go down, range goes down, but quality went up, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually, now it can go. I mean, we've all seen, big, huge dudes or people with beautiful bodies that move with control. I mean, less and less, but move with control when everybody else is throwing shit
Yeah.
around and they're like, it's like, oh, it's really impressive. It's really impressive when you see somebody who actually got a really great build and they can control some stuff and you don't see them flinging stuff around. And it's like, oh, yeah, it is possible,
Yeah.
right?
And
It
I,
just
I
took a
think it
lot
helps with
of,
separation a lot. I think that's one of the reasons why I've
yeah,
been so separated as well.
yeah. This is when you start realizing like there's directions on all these heads I can
Mhm.
add, right? So like, look, you got 6 different directions I put on your delt. And you're just like, well, I just advantage one of them all the time. It's like, well, okay, that's why we don't see those cannonballs, or that's why we don't see like, why is that head developed over there? Like even bicep. So many guys don't even set up the like a preacher curl. They don't set up their shoulder. There's a funny one. They don't set up their shoulder 90 degrees to a preacher bench. And so everything is either pulled into their side and they pull across. So now it's like, well, you've
Yeah.
got this head, but you don't have the other head. It's
Yeah.
like your long head doesn't get much stimulus. And then they say, can you help me with my brachialis? I'm like, your lateral brachialis. Yeah, yeah. You need to load the lateral head of your bicep. No, well, I do the things. I'm like, no, you don't. Right. So once you perpendicular the bicep to that pad and then understand a carry angle, right? Because they don't understand a carry angle and think everything's supposed to be straight. So like, well, if you look down, and you see a straight arm, you are internally rotated, like you are
Yeah.
sitting there. No matter how much supination you think you have to do at the wrist, you've set the exercise up like in the wrong direction, and so now you're pulling across, thinking your supination is going to save it. And I'm like, no, you've set it up pronated, right? And so now it's like, oh, you're going across your elbow and wondering why you have elbow pain or why you don't get, one head is way developed. I'm like, yeah, you're pulling across your shoulder. No wonder you didn't actually do anything to your lateral head. You didn't line it up at all. you should feel like, oh, that feels like shoulder flexion there. It's like, oh yeah, right, not adduction, right? So as soon as you can help line that up, it's like those little things. They're all just kind of little code breaker things for exercises where you see somebody going, I didn't think my front delt should be lining up with my bicep. I'm like, they all are right there. I
The
think you can probably
bicipital
line
grooves
those
right
up.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, bicipital grooves right there, and your pecs right there, and your log head is right there. I'm like,
Yeah.
like all in the same spot. I think they're all pointed in the same direction. I think
Right.
you kind of use that as a flag, right? But their biceps pointed sideways.
Yeah.
So
See it
they're
all the
doing their
time.
bicep curls
Yeah.
across their
Arm
body.
wrestler. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Weird arm wrestle things. And then you see
Yeah.
like radial ulnar pain.
Yeah. You can see
I
the
was like,
swelling a lot of times.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's like sitting on your car door and
Yeah.
wondering, rep after rep that the dumbbell's trying to do this to you. And you're trying to think this is somehow vertical. I'm like, am I the only person that doesn't see that this is vertical? This is often some other plane of motion,
Right.
right? And they go, I don't know why my elbow hurts. I'm like, you lined it up to just go right across that elbow. So same thing for knees, like somebody doing a knee extension and they've this, I don't know who started this or thought this was smart, but it's like the bolts where the machine rotates kind of line up with the axial bolts that you're supposed to go through. And when you turn something sideways on a seat, now, sometimes with bigger guys, my legs aren't monstrous as strong as they are. They're not monstrous. Some of the guys have, huge, huge legs. And I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of hamstring that's trying to like kind of that volume is trying to push out on a leg extension. Yeah, you got to control that. Now we go back to abs. You got to control your pelvis. You can't just let your legs fall outwards and then wonder why is medialis doing work different than, lateralis? Why do my knees start to hurt on a leg extension? I'm like, your knees aren't pointing vertical, your femur's not pointed vertical. Well, I'm trying. I'm like, you're using your feet to try and, well, how about you use your hips?
Yeah.
Like, figure out the muscles around your hips to hold your hips. It's like my hand trying to control my shoulder. Why do you use the muscles around your shoulder to control that? Right. And again, we go back to them trying to fix something in place. Like they go from fixing something in place to not fixing anything in place.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, oh, guys, pick which one you are. Pelvis, you let them go everywhere, and then shoulders, you try and restrict them the whole time. Like both of those strategies aren't going to help you, right?
So I've been up here for a long time. Before I let you go, I just want to kind of ask how are
Yeah.
the vibes there? Like, were you pretty close with Mike? I mean, you guys were pretty big trainers there.
No,
You weren't
no,
that tight with Mike? Were you guys like not
no.
cool
Mike
or
and I
what?
were never friends. Mike and I were never friends. I probably was the antithesis. I was the anti-Mike more than anything else.
Was that why you
Not
guys
by
weren't
my
friends?
choice.
Just because of
No,
philosophy or
not by my
what?
choice. He just is a. Um, I'll get in trouble now. He just always seemed like a really insecure guy.
Yeah.
For a monster of a human. He is
No,
big dude,
I could see that. Yeah, I
for a
met him.
monster of a human. He just like, okay, man. I mean, a good conversation with Mike was, hey, Mike, how you doing? Meh. Pretty much that's it. If he grunted at you, meh, whatever. I was like, oh, that's a lot of conversation. I was never on his favorite list. And, I was newer there. He's a big dog. He was the big dog there or one of the big dogs there, but I wasn't there to make enemies. I was there to make friends, and funny enough, I offered to help him. He's had, multiple
Yeah. Surgeries.
injuries. Yeah, he's got a brand new shoulder. He's got a brand new hip. He's had a hip resurfacing when he was much younger. Um, all lifting injury things,
Yeah.
and then just lifting like a whatever. Um, he hurt himself doing some kind of crazy exhibit dumbbell press, like 200-pound dumbbells,
Yeah.
when he was in his prime. And he didn't really feel good, but he's like, oh, people came to watch. So like a powerlifting, like somebody's going to
Yeah.
lift those dumbbells. And of course, he's, big 300 plus pound human. He's a big man. And,
Yeah.
but, he was never a small man. You know, he could do nothing, still be a big dude. So, that was never a little guy that became a big guy. That was just
Yeah.
a big, huge guy that became a bigger, huge
Bigger.
guy. That's like the rich got richer kind of thing.
Yeah.
He was never a little guy ever. And so, yeah, he lifted 200-pound. He told me he lifted 200-pound dumbbell and something went,
Yeah.
and, that was sort of the arc of that injury, and then over time, over years, just got worse and worse. And then I don't know what he did to his hip. He never told me that.
Probably not having
But
IR
again,
and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of that, missing that. And then all of a sudden, something's scraping on something, whether it's probably a labral tear or something that eventually progressed itself. And then he was too young to get a full hip replacement, so he got a hip resurface, which is a small post. And then I think it was a leg press or something. All of a sudden, he bent the post.
Oh
It's
shit.
like emergency hip replacement right there.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
you know, and so yeah, no, he wasn't interested in any version of therapy I had to offer. He wasn't, whatever.
What are your thoughts on the exit, the whole thing with Nippard?
I wasn't there that day of all things, but I was there the day after it happened. And I remember I was having lunch and I could hear some yelling. And I was just like, when big dudes are yelling across the gym at each other. And I thought it was banter. And I was like, geez, the guys are really loud, because I was off in a different direction. There's one of the big, like 340-pound guys call him out. Like, and there was no, like, nobody stepped up. It was one of those, you want to challenge somebody, how about you pick on someone your own size? And it was like,
Yeah.
nope, nobody's picking up that phone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the big guys had taken exception to him doing it, and I actually at the time I didn't even know that it even happened. So I was like, what? Yeah, I mean, I kind of laughed. It's like watching your whole fitness career disappear in 5 seconds.
Right.
It's
So
like,
he came into work the next day. They didn't ban him yet.
no, well, they hadn't had a chance yet. So he came in and they hadn't even had a position sort of what the hell happened. Like the two brothers are owners, and there's some back and forth between the two of them, but they didn't really get together. It was kind of like, what just happened? And
Yeah.
so it kind of looked poor. Like the gym was like, we're cool with it. They're not. They were never
Yeah.
cool with it. It was not ever something they were okay with. But it was one of those scenarios where, you know, hey, we kind of come out with a position paper here. Let's make sure people understand we're not cool with this. And they sent him an email or a text. I don't think they went up and talked to him, but they sent him a
Yeah.
text like, "Hey man, finish up the day. You got to like check out.
Yeah.
Finish up with your client. You got to leave. Kind of thing." And so, I mean, he came in like, "No, there's nothing wrong." I mean, I
Yeah.
kind of laughed. One of the comments that somebody, I mean, this tells you something. So he did have a hip replacement, right? The emergency hip replacement, and um, he got a handicap sticker because he was walking around with a walker and all that stuff. Well, he didn't get a handicap plate. He got a sticker that he could just throw in his window. Well, if he didn't fucking park in the handicap parking, you know, ever since he got that, but he's like walking around squatting and working out. So I'm like, you still kept your sticker, dude. Like,
Yeah.
come on, man.
One of
Like,
them.
and so one of the comments was, "Oh, at least there'll be another handicap spot available now, right?" Because it's like
It's
the one
hilarious.
closest to the building is
Right.
these two handicap spots, and he parked right there every day. But I had a client come in for therapy that had cerebral palsy, right? And I
Oh,
said,
that's
"Listen,
fucked.
no," I was like, "Hey, man, there's a handicap spot. There might be somebody parked in one of them, but." And so he pulled in and he looks at it. It's one of these monster trucks, and Mike's like good 6'3",
Yeah.
280, 300 pounds, and a big defensive lineman kind of guy. And he looks up at this truck and says to me, that truck is the epitome of not handicapped.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
like no
Right.
handicapped person could ever
What
even like,
the
how does a
he's
handicap
like,
even get in this
right.
vehicle,
Maybe
like
it has a lift.
yeah,
That
like you've got a
one.
lifter that a crane that drops you
Right.
in or something. But he was laughing. He's like, yeah, that is definitely not a handicap vehicle right there. So so yeah, we got two parking spots now available. There you go.
Well, there's a plus, man.
Oh
Man,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time. Is there anything you want to throw out there or cover before I let you go? Anything you want to touch
No,
on?
obviously, yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed watching some of your stuff. I appreciate just having the opportunity to kind of have a similar conversation. I
Yeah.
mean, the sad part is there's a bunch of stuff out there now. The more I get exposed to more and more of the community, as I said, I was in, people say, where have you been? You haven't been in professional. I've been in professional sports from basketball to baseball to football, and hockey for sure. And then running a clinic. I haven't had time to be in bodybuilding.
Yeah.
So now it's kind of like, oh, I have time, and oh my gosh, this is where all this stuff comes from. So it's nice to have somebody else that's kind of pointing out one way or another, pointing out the bullshit of like, hey, this is
Yeah.
a false narrative here. This is not
Right.
actually true. You're creating more problems than you think in this, because it does seem like if there's more people willing to kind of like ask the questions, like this doesn't seem to be working for everybody, like why are we all still doing this, but if they just sort of follow along and nobody's kind of voicing any of those differences, then most people just, I guess the gym's not for me, or I got
Right.
injured, or, right? I guess, oh, I like the gym, but I got hurt,
Yeah,
you
which is the
know?
worst thing, because like you said, there is a language to movement. There's a way to do it where you improve your mobility and everything without fucking everything up.
Yeah, like this should be about getting better,
Yeah,
regardless whether you're going to be a world class bodybuilder or not. This is about you becoming like you to you being better, right? Whether you choose to ever be on a stage or whatever, or wanting to take your shirt off and look good naked or whatever some of the silly things that people say,
right.
I just want to look good naked. You're like, okay, I'm not here to shit on that goal. But at the end of the day, it's like, but I got in the gym and now I look really hurt. Now I don't move well. And now, oh, I wish I never went to the gym. And it's like, well, that whole thing was supposed to be about
Yeah.
getting better and being a better version of yourself, not the opposite. So yeah, I think, people like yourself that seem to be putting out better content or better commentary that, hey, there might be another way to do this. I think, yeah, you should champion that. I think you're doing a great job.
Yeah, you too, man. Keep it up. Do you have
Yeah.
any more pros working with this season besides Robin at the gym?
I have Robin. I'm working with Morgan.
Oh, big old
Uh,
Morgan.
yeah, I've worked with Quentin once in a while, but he's his own cat.
Yeah.
Um, I worked with Anton every once in a while as well. I'm actually working with Aaron Gawley
Oh yeah, he's a
sometime
big dude
during this
too.
holiday. Yeah, I mean, like giant, like gravity, sheets of gravity coming off some of these
Black
people.
hole.
I mean, you're looking at 6 foot, 6'2", 340. Oh, 6'3", 340. Oh, 6'5", 340. I'm like, holy mackerel! Like, you don't really. I'm used to like, oh, he's 5'8" and you know 260. Like, oh
That's
yeah, no
still giant.
problem. Yeah, just still giants. I mean, they're still giants. Like Justin Shire, I worked with Justin Shire not
Oh,
too long
cool.
ago. You know, I mean, he's not a big man, right? He's
He's
wide
got he's got
and
a
very.
beautiful physique
He's got a
from the
great
front. Yeah.
physique. But funny enough, it's like, oh, he's got stuff that's not working, and he's got stuff he's been training around, the stuff he's trying to
Yeah.
avoid. My knee kind of bugs me, and
I see it
you
in his
know,
training too, a little bit. I
yeah,
mean, he's pretty on
he
point,
just
but
kind of
just a
toughs
little
through
bit.
it sometimes,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh man, like that's not the one to tough through. And
Yeah.
so I get like I worked with Regan Grimes. I worked with him just recently, and the YouTube was oh, no knee pain,
Yeah, there we go.
like
So that's good. You're getting
ding,
out there. That's important to
yeah,
like, because like you
no
said,
knee
you're
pain.
spreading the right message.
But the funny part is it's not knee plural, it's singular. So it's like you're a symmetry athlete, but you have knee pain in one knee. So it's not like, oh, I trained so hard, I pain in both my knees. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I pain in one elbow, I pain in one shoulder, pain in one. It's like, so there's something going on that you're not doing or don't understand. And, he's like one of those crazy super athletes that just, like tell him to do something. Okay. It's like you leave him alone. He just does whatever he wants to do. And he still seems to show
He
up like,
looks like
you
he
know,
connects his back so good during his
oh my
training.
God, his back is just sort of this like, whoa, like an alien kind of thing going
Uh,
on. Yeah, he connects very well to his back. There's another guy, doesn't train abs, barely trains any abs. Um, doesn't really pay attention to his hips the way he should. So his one hip will stray a little bit, and sure enough, knee pain. So it's like,
yeah.
oh, he's back on the outside edges of one foot
Yeah.
and wondering, oh, my knee just keeps, run a hack squat, or why are your knees not tracking? Like, why are you not paying attention to that? Oh, I didn't really think about my feet at all. I'm like,
Come on, Milos. I know you worked out with Milos a bunch.
yeah, like, come on, man, right? Like, are you just trying? Again, these guys can just go, right? In some cases, they can go. You can ask yourself, like, how are they not hurt? I'm like, not yet. I mean, knock on wood. I hope not, but at some point, it's not yet. That's all,
Yeah.
right? Even when we were, I mean, I'm older than you, but there would always be an up and coming bodybuilder that was like the next whatever, and then all of a sudden they're gone, and you're like, whatever happened to that guy? Oh, tore his pec, tore his bicep, tore that off, tore his lat, whatever, and you're like, oh well, next,
No, I know.
right?
This is nuts.
It's such a waste of potential, such a waste of these amazing bodies, right?
And
But
they're just thinking they're doing the best and working hard.
yeah, yeah, just
I
work hard and rip it off.
I really like how we have a very similar end product with the way we work out, even though we have very slightly different lenses that we look through. So I think
Sure,
anytime
yeah, yeah.
different systems leads you to the same conclusion, is you're kind of onto something.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're doing a great job. I mean, as I said, I watched a bunch of content just to sort of like be ready for us having a chat. And I was like, oh yeah, really great, really great, really great. Even your critique stuff, I did have to laugh, all the Dr. Mike stuff,
All
all the
right.
Dr.
I'm
Mike
sure
stuff.
you're bored with most of that.
Oh my goodness. Well, I was blessed to watch him work up at Pure once. I was like, oh, well, here we go. Let's see.
Instructed millions of
Oh,
people biomechanics.
oh, yeah. I was like, wow, okay.
That's why
Yeah,
we got to be louder.
making some interesting choices. I'll say that. But as I said, I thought I actually really liked your commentary about like what he's doing, what he says, but what he's doing.
Yeah.
And then what he's making Jared do, and how Jared is doing what he does, but not really doing what he does. Right? I think that's a really important focus on that, because just it doesn't make him a bad coach relative. If he can hold somebody else in it, it makes him a poor performer for himself. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, do what I say, don't look at what I do. Right? And so it's like, okay, he needs to take it down a notch. I think I watched him doing a leg curl, a seated leg curl. I don't know, recently,
Screaming.
when he on the prime machine, you see him screaming. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
if you go back through that and you take a look at how far forward he is in the seat, his knees, it's like, are you lining up your hip to the bolt on the machine? You know what I mean? Like, he's not a big guy; he's a very short little guy.
Yeah.
So it's like you are slid so far forward that the axis on the knee isn't even coming close to like where the machine is supposed to bend. It's not where he's bending. Like, he's bending more
I was
like with his hips.
I was so distracted by just the sheer idiocracy of
Yeah,
him
the
screaming. I
screaming.
didn't
Yeah,
even notice.
you go
I'll go
back and
check it
look and
out.
see how he lines himself up on that machine, and you'd be like, oh, yeah, okay. And then he's screaming and doing speed at the same time. So it's like, yeah, yeah,
Not hard
it's
if it's
like,
moving that fast, bro.
yeah, it's moving that fast and it's moving so poorly. His legs are externally rotating. He's just slinging that thing, and he's so far forward on the seat. I'm like, dude, like, oh, disaster. Right. So yeah, you go back and that's a present for you. There you go.
I'll check it out.
That's your present.
Awesome,
Go back
man.
and check it out.
Well, thank you so much, man. It's been great chatting. I'd love to do it again sometime,
Absolutely, buddy.
buddy.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take it easy. Good night.
Have a good night, Eric.